The agenda pack with papers is available by mod.gov or directly from the council website from the link that has been sent out to members and is publicly available. When I invite someone to speak, could they please state clearly who you are for the benefit of anybody who's listening to the meeting so that I can identify you? Can I also warmly welcome any members of the public and media who are joining us today? This meeting is being recorded and will be available sometime later today or tomorrow if you want to catch up or check anything. As agendas are now viewed electronically, could I please request that members and officers refer to the page numbers on the published agenda pack so that to help us all find the appropriate information rather than having to hunt around for it. Okay, thank you very much. So we kick off with agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence.
We have had apologies from Councillor Coles with Councillor Lovell as substitute, Councillor Prior-Sankey with Councillor Robbins as substitute, and
Can you move, sorry, Max, can you move the mic a bit closer, please?
Okay, Councillor Hart with Councillor Osborne as substitute.
Thank you. Was that it? Are there any? Oh, where's?
Thank you, Chair. You're aware that I need to be away early-ish to get to a funeral and you're just after 1.
So
Thank you.
I'm told. And
I think Councillor Denton as well with Councillor Osborne substituting.
Thank you very much. Right, we'll crack on. The minutes of the previous meeting, they have been. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I know that Councillor Prior-Sankey sends her apologies.
Thank you very much. And Federica Smith-Roberts got in touch with me earlier on, and you're covering for her today. Thank you. Right, item 2 are the minutes of the previous meeting that was held on the 10th of April. They have been circulated. Is everybody happy that I sign them as a correct record? Okay, I'll do that in due course. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? It's item 3. Specific to the agenda or not? No. Okay, thank you very much. We'll take the standard ones as read. Item 4 is public question time. Jenny, do we have any public questions today?
There are no public questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, now we'll move on to the item 5, which is the work programme, which again has been circulated. You'll see from the agendas that our next meeting is set for the 1st of August. And at the moment we have the Octagon Theatre business case coming forward, an item on wheelchair accessible taxis, and we will have a finance update, which is fairly standard these days. One other thing we have talked about is, Dawn and I have talked about, is changes to the golf club lease. Is that, I don't, Chris, I don't, Dawn mentioned it earlier today, but I don't know anything about that. Is it particularly significant, or can you just give us a quick brief on what's happening and what the decision-making process is?
Yeah, certainly. So Steve Hughes, who's the project lead for this area of work in leisure, has circulated a key decision or a proposed key decision to members. And I know Councillor Johnson's raised some questions which have been responded to. So this stems back to a change that was delivered as part of the COVID response. So all operators had to close their leisure facilities. The operators lost significant sums of money, and in order to balance that, protect our contract, and our contract is a cash positive contract to the council. So it was not in our interest for the contractor to default. So we have come up with an arrangement that spreads the cost of their contractual payments over a longer period of time. It's been through a legal process. It's taken a while. It was due to be completed, and then the operator wanted to make some changes, and we wanted to make some changes and differentiate between lot 1, which is gym and swim facilities, and this is purely the inherited contract from Somerset West and Taunton. It's not the other ex-district contracts. So lot 1 pays us a cash positive amount annually. Lot 2 is golf and high ropes, and that's an area that's subsidised by this council. So with negotiation with the operator, the extension for lot 1 cash positive is longer than it is for golf and high ropes, which gives the council an opportunity to come out of that subsidy arrangement 5 years earlier than the arrangement for for gym and swim. So
Okay.
it's a positive change, but we'd be happy to come back and bring a summary. The decision would be via key decision published.
So has the decision been made yet, or has just been?
No, it's been circulated as an early draft for comments, and then it would be published subject to those comments.
Okay. Um,
One of the things that I sought clarity on was where the operator stood with regard to this, and it was well explained as to why the operator was on board with this arrangement.
So in Dawn, do you feel this is something this committee needs to look into? I mean, from what Chris has said, it seems a fairly straightforward arrangement.
I'm happy. I had answers that the operator was supportive, so I don't think there's anything too contentious about it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have a little bit of time before the 1st of August, so if there are any other items that you feel that the committee should be looking at, and I'm sure there'll be one or two before then, either let Dawn or myself know. Wes?
We spoke some months ago, probably last year now, about CCTV and visiting the offices and the control room in Bridgewater, but obviously nothing happened. Then I think the manager was ill at the time and it got cancelled. Is there any update on that, please?
Yeah, I think that coincidentally was around about the time some of the decisions were being taken about the service. Whether the two were linked, I don't know. So, Chris, what's the situation with the CCTV? Has devolution taken place, or is it appropriate for this committee to look into that and have a visit to Bridgewater?
Yeah, by all means. So the operation remains one of Somerset Council's. The MTFP proposal initially put forward was to close down the service. That wasn't necessary in the end because a number of key town and parish councils that use the facilities or benefit from them have come forward with funding. So effectively, the money that it would have cost Somerset Council to run CCTV is now being provided by the individual towns and parishes at which those cameras are located. So the operation is still ours. The staffing group is still ours. It's just the funding arrangements are now different. So if members want to have a visit to the facilities, no problem. We did lose the manager a while back. I believe we're in the process of trying to recruit to that post. So we might want to coincide it with that. But otherwise, you'd be very welcome to come and we would happily host that.
Yeah, I seem to recall that the fix was for 12 months only. And also, I think if there is a new manager there was also they were carrying some vacancies. Am I right? So I think if we can arrange something once the new manager has been recruited, I think that would be of benefit to us. Everybody happy with that? Andy?
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Chair. So I had a question around the funding on the CCTV and whether it might be brought back to this committee, because my understanding is the funding that was originally promised by one of the town councils isn't going to meet the levels that they'd originally said, and how that might impact the delivery of the service.
Okay, I think under the circumstances then, and because I do recall that it was a sort of 12-month stopgap arrangement, this is probably something we need to look at. When would be a suitable time, Chris? Probably September?
Yeah, I would suggest so. So I think we need to review it prior to the budget setting cycle for 25-26. So yes, September time would be appropriate. I think I don't know the exact details, and Sarah, whilst joining us later, probably isn't going to be able to pick those out immediately. So we can come back to you with that. Happily bring a report on the breakdown of those. I know that many of the town and parish councils that contributed, whilst initially they've said it's a commitment for 1 year, they have put it into their base budget. So Taunton Town Council, as an example, it sits within their base budget and is funded perpetually should they choose to do so. And the service level agreements have been created between Somerset Council and the individual council. So yes, technically it may appear that some of those are short cycles, but the funding remains in place. So we'd be happy to come back and give you a full breakdown of that, perhaps September.
I recall that when the suggestion of closing the service was made as part of the changes or the cuts, the savings, shall we say, then there was a considerable amount of public concern raised. So I think from the point of view of this committee, we would like to make sure that we do have a robust and continuing service, or one will be delivered within Somerset. Cool.
I just wanted to ask, because when I sat on the community scrutiny at district, we used to get the police come and talk to us and give us updates, and I'm not aware that we've had any conversation from, well, it's not any presentation or briefing from them as to sort of what's going on. I don't know if that's still within this remit or whether it's shifted, but I know it was really helpful to get an update on sort of crime and what's going on for them in their work.
Yes, yes, Chris.
So I will come to that one. I just had a message come through saying that the service level agreements on CCTV are for 3 years. There are some break clauses, but they're 3 years, so we do have a bit of time. I think September is still the right time now for you to scrutinise. In terms of the police involvement, so the community safety aspect of the council's responsibility currently sits under localities and partnerships, which is in a separate executive director area. I don't know how long I'll be able to continue to say that. We're going to talk about structural changes in a moment, but as it stands at the moment, it does sit elsewhere to this committee.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Any other subjects that of interest to members at the moment? Okay, to say, if you think of something outside the meeting, then please let us know. Looking at the tracker, the Glastonbury Festival Scrutiny Report. Glastonbury is now 2 weeks away, something like that. We're having a wash-up report coming to us in September, which will be very interesting. I've been party to some email traffic. I think there are still 1 or 2 concerns being raised locally, and although it seems to be primarily around traffic management rather than anything else, which falls outside the remit of this committee, which is one of the issues. I think there's a sort of lot of crossover between us and climate and place. Rush sleeping initiative, we've had a briefing on that. Community services budget monitoring is ongoing. You've probably heard that Christian can't come today because they're still trying to finalise last year's outturn. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until the 1st of August for that. And we've had the open spaces briefing as well. And taxi fares, I think we're still going to keep a watching brief on taxis and taxi fares. So I think that covers the work programme. Yes, Liz.
Could I just report, Chair, that in a recent meeting with the external auditor lead, Barry Morris, he explained how difficult it is for new councils in the first year of unitary to bring forward both the outturn and the budget monitoring within the first years. And I was really relieved to hear him say that it's not just Somerset Council. And we didn't prod him or ask him to tell us. He told us that his understanding is that the first years of a new unitary council are challenging from the point of view of outturn and budget monitoring in the early months of the new council. That doesn't mean we sit on our hands and do nothing. There is a great deal of work going on. And that Barry Morris's comments were for councils without a new finance system. So we do have additional challenge. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I mean, I think without the financial emergency, the task of amalgamating 5 different councils' finance arrangements into one is going to be challenging anyway. You lay on top of that a new finance system, everybody has to get their head around, and the financial emergency. Then I'm not surprised. Clearly, given the financial issues that emerged last year, then the sooner we can get a handle on where we are, the better it's going to be. And this is not just for this particular area, but for the entire council, because knowing actually how much we overspent last year or underspent or whatever is crucial going forward in terms of the decisions we need to make pretty much now. So obviously, I'm sure the finance team is working their socks off to get this done, but the quicker we can find out actually where we are, the intern and the outturn, the better it will be. But anyway, if you could give our thanks to all of them for everything that they've done, because it's, as you say, immensely challenging and must be pretty stressful too, I would think. So, yeah.
If I may just go on to say that the corporate and resources scrutiny later this month will have a verbal, if not written, update on the outturn. So there's just one area where we're still looking for an outturn figure. That includes treasury management. But treasury management is good news. So there are some areas that are good news, some areas that are more challenging, and it's kind of how they add up. There is nothing there that is making me feel that we're looking at a worse situation than month 10, but because I haven't seen the final figures, I wouldn't want to report on any of the others at the moment. So corporate and resources will have outturn either verbal or written report, and then a month 2 emerging issues report, and then of course children's adult scrutiny, they come after that, and so we're expecting the same reports to go to them. This scrutiny is just a little bit earlier, hence the lack of reports here today, but the work is ongoing, and corporate and resources scrutiny is the right place for that work to be seen first. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Okay, right, moving on to agenda item 5. Some of you may have attended the briefing with Duncan on Monday, but clearly there are some significant structural changes being proposed to the council to help us balance our budget. Some of these will be impacting on the community's area of work. So I've asked Chris just to give us a quick rundown on where it is in terms of the work that affects this committee directly. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, just to clarify, the request was to talk through some of the structural changes that are occurring with the impact on communities, not just in terms of the Layer 2-3 proposals, but also to touch a little bit on the voluntary redundancy process that we've been through as well. I am trying to get this to play as a slideshow, and it is resisting me at the moment. So I will start just talking through where we are. So you'll be aware of the financial challenges, of course. We've talked about them long and hard. The current target is to reduce our workforce costs by in excess of £40 million by the 1st of April next year. That means in order to meet that target, we have to make the reductions this year so that we get the full year effect saving from April. So the earlier we can see the reductions in workforce, then the more financially beneficial that is. Financially, clearly there is a large knock-on effect to the authority of losing £40 million worth of its resources. So the executive have endorsed a new vision, and they've emphasised a much leaner and more productive council. We're looking at a number of strategies in order to reduce our workforce, and voluntary redundancy was one of those, but it's just the start of that process. We will be restructuring the entirety of the council. And the layers 2 and 3 proposals that we're going to talk through in a bit more detail, they are the start of that process. It's also fair to point out that the layer 2 and 3 proposals are proposals of the head of paid service, so the chief executive. There are people on this call and in this room that are directly impacted by it. So we're happy to take any questions that you've got, but it may be more appropriate that some of those are directed back to Duncan. Okay, so we are aiming for an organisation that has 6 layers top to bottom. So the reason for that is that the tighter the organisation it is, the easier it is to control communications, and the less management distraction there becomes across the organisation. So it's financially efficient, but it's actually more efficient for the running of the organisation. So the layer 2 and 3 proposals, and you'll note the language previously was about tiers. We're now talking in terms of layers, but layer 2 is the executive director cohort. Layer 3 is the service director cohort. So this consultation that I'm going to show you in detail relates purely to layer 2 and 3 at this stage. Layers 4, 5 and 6 will be published over the summer period of this year, and it will be a separate consultation. That is challenging because that effectively is the rest of the organisation. As a point of principle, if we were to apply the 6x6 rules, i.e. there are 6 layers within the organisation, and then everyone who has a management responsibility has at least 6 direct reports. So that's the 6x6 model that you may have heard about. In order for that to happen and reduce down the number of service director roles, there will be some posts that report into executive directors that are at head of service level. So executive directors will have reports that are service directors and others within the organisation. It won't be a flat structure in the context of only service directors reporting to executive directors. There is an overall reduction proposed within this consultation, and that takes the number of executive director posts down from 7 to 4, and the number of service director posts down from 22 to 15. There's also a proposal in there for an interim role to cover the transitional arrangements for our Section 151 responsibilities. I've talked about the heads of service thing. Consultation is underway with those employees who are impacted and with the unions, so that is the legal requirement. We are showing this to the rest of the organisation, but it's not a formal consultation with other employees. Clearly, if someone spots something of interest, we are encouraging them to let us know. However, it's not a formal consultation with the rest of the organisation. In the way that it was done with LGR, it's too complex to do it in that way. My next slide, I've colour coded some of the roles here. So those that are ringed in red are deletions. I've applied the colour coding to all of the executive roles. I've only applied the colour coding to the service director roles where they are either within communities now or are impacted by the proposals in the sense of where community functions are centralised.
Is there any way we can make it a bit bigger? I can't read it.
I am doing my best, but for some reason. Let's see. Ah, look at that. No, you're quite right. So I don't think these will be surprises, but I'll talk through them. So all executive director posts are ringed in a colour. So to be clear, anything red, that post is proposed to be deleted. Whereas ringed in amber, it is deemed to be a significant change and the post holder will be impacted by the proposals, but this is not a deletion of the post, but there is a significant change happening to it. Where it's ringed in green, there are not deemed to be significant changes to the post. The phrase significant matters in an HR context. It's usually referenced as being a change that's larger than 25% and would cause that post holder either to be directly impacted because of that change and have to reapply. And the constitutional arrangements for the council are anyone who has to reapply for a role or is challenged by the process, the new posts as chief officers are member appointments. Will.
Chris, can I just interrupt? You will be happy for this to be circulated after the meeting?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Andy, you had a question for Chris?
Yeah, question specifically on this one. The previous slide said there were going to be 4 posts down from 7. There's 3, 2 green and an amber. I'm missing one, I think.
Yeah, so don't try and make the numbers work on this slide because some of them are deleted, but then combined and a new post replaces it. So when we flick to the next slide, what you'll see is how those combinations occur. So for example, the Director of Public Health, the Executive Director of Public Health, that is just removed under this proposal. However, the Director of Community Services and Climate and Place will be merged to a single role, and you'll see that in a moment. I haven't ringed all of the service director posts, as I've said. I've tried to identify those that I think will be an interest to this committee because they are either community services roles now or they are part of the new combined world, and this will make sense a little more in a moment. So you'll see that some are green, some are therefore unchanged in a significant fashion, and some are red for deletions, and they become combinations as well later, and some are amber, one is amber, where the post holder is impacted, but the post isn't deleted, but it's significantly changed. I appreciate there's a lot of HR language in here, so it's now not letting me move slides.
So is everybody happy that they
Okay, so the new proposals for the organisation, I've talked about there being those 4 executive directors and this transitional arrangement for the section 151. So effectively, the role of climate, place and communities is combined under this proposal, and you'll see moving in the service directors or director posts that are also in some places combined. So partnership, localities and culture is a combined service director role where there are currently 2. In the future proposal, there is 1. Similarly, with economic development, skills and climate, that is currently spread across 2 service directors. That proposed to become 1. The service director for housing is moved across into adults, social care under their executive area, but primarily that is the general fund aspect. So the post moves, the general fund aspect, so housing enabling, housing options, rough sleeping pathway, all of the general fund aspects move directly with the post. But you'll see at the bottom of the list, in that highlighted column, housing from an HRA perspective will be retained within that operational services functionality. Well,
Dawn has a question.
I just wanted to understand the process that's come before this, Chris. So how has this been arrived at and who's been involved in that process?
so
Yeah, I mean, be as clear and candid as you wish, but I appreciate these are not your decisions and they are out for consultation as well.
yes, absolutely. So we're under consultation process. The process is one of the chief executive, as a head of paid service, has looked at mechanisms to reduce the pay bill. So if the organisation is going to shrink by 40+ million pounds, then the leadership and management of the organisation needs to shrink by its relevant proportion. So that's roughly 25%. So the same rules have been applied for the most senior layers as they will be throughout the organisation, which is a reduction of resourcing of around 25%. So that's the context in which he's been working. The combinations, I think we can see there's some logic to where these combinations have occurred, but if you've got a specific challenge, I'll have to hold that for a section with Duncan, I think.
No, I'm not particularly challenging the decisions. I'm just curious to know, has it come from the chief executive or have other people been involved in this process?
So it is the chief executive's proposal as head of paid service.
Yeah, I think in terms of the purpose of it coming to this committee, I think I don't particularly want these proposals to be challenged. I want them to be understood. If you're particularly unhappy with them and want them to challenge, then can I suggest you take it through your relevant political groups to feedback that way? Because I think all I want to do is for people to understand the changes that are being proposed. If you have a particular issue with them for whatever reason, then I think we need to adopt that. I don't think that is a role for a scrutiny committee at this point. And although I'm quite happy to be challenged on that, but clearly we don't. This is just an information item. We don't want to we haven't really got time to get into a full debate about it. So if there is significant concern, I suggest you take it through a sort of group route first. So Andy.
I'm not challenging nothing, Chair. It's just that for about a year now, we've heard how overworked certain officers are, if not all officers, and I thoroughly understand that. Now we're shrinking the workforce. Are some officers going to be still stretched and even more stretched and jump ship after a while? If you've been through transformation before, you'll understand what I'm sort of trying to say to you.
Yeah, I think there's a real challenge for the organisation as a whole in terms of the finances say that we cannot afford to survive in the current format, and therefore part of our financial strategy is to reduce the workforce, spend less money, be really clear about the things that we will provide and won't provide. So there will be a reduction of staffing across the entire organisation. This is the first phase of it, as I've described. And yes, there is always a risk that the roles being combined become larger roles. There's nothing that these posts will stop doing. They will be combined. And that is always a challenge. And it's important that obviously the organisation recruits the right people into those roles who are able to lead these areas. These people are the leaders. They aren't the doers of the organisation. The doers come within layers 4, 5 and 6. predominantly in layer 6, if we're really honest. So there is always a challenge that the more you combine, the more challenging those roles become. But the financial situation is we clearly cannot carry on as we are. And it's that context that's driven this, not as saying, well, you know, we've got lots and lots of duplication and we can be more efficient in that context. Although I would say that the organisation is so large that we are running a number of our own internal bureaucratic processes that actually having fewer people around will trim some of those processes and make them more efficient because they will have to be. So I think there are two parts to it, but will people jump ship? That's clearly a challenge. When you place people at risk of redundancy, you don't really know what they will do. We hope that there will be credible candidates for each role, not only in the layers 2, 3 proposals, but as we move through the organisation.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Sue?
Yeah, it's just really to comment. I think Dawn actually has a point in terms of these are the proposals that the chief executive has come up with. But I think to help us to understand, it's maybe as well, it would be useful to know what sort of advice, evidence the chief executive sought and took in order to arrive at the structure he did. I know it's out for consultation at the moment, and I'm sure there's going to be various issues from the people who are actually on the front line doing the job. I'm sure they will raise issues as to why X may not go with Y or Y goes with Z. Certainly, personally, I would think it would be, I'm quite happy to see housing with adult social care and possibly children's, because there are a lot of issues around what happens to someone in housing that subsequently becomes unsuitable and how do we get them moved. It's joined up thinking. But in terms of how the chief executive arrived at 6x6, because I'm sure other models of management are available, it's basically the evidence he sought and the thought process that took us to where we are now and gave us the structure which we are being asked to understand now.
Thanks, Sue. I think that's probably a question that's better directed to Duncan Sharkey directly. I think he will be doing further briefings, all councillor briefings planned. So I think that's probably the best place to pick that up, because all Chris is articulating is what Duncan has come up with, really, and where it's going to impact on this particular directorate. Okay, Chris? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Go on.
Just very quick question. The consultation obviously is to staff. It's an internal process. Can I just check, has that gone to all staff or is just those staff that have been directly impacted? And can we have any information on what that consultation is kind of asking, or is that something that's internally private?
So those being formally consulted with are those impacted by the structure. So the roles, pretty much all of the roles identified on there are impacted in some way. So the formal consultation is with them. The consultation doesn't ask a specific question. It asks for you as an impacted individual to consider the proposals and pass comment. So there aren't set questions. It's an open text box, if you like, to say, what is it you feel about these proposals? Do you think they're right? Do you think they go far enough, too far, etc.? But there aren't set questions in this environment. And that's happening with, say, those impacted directly and the unions, because that is the requirement. It is not a formal consultation with the rest of the staff cohort. So those impacted are the focus of this for layers 2 and 3.
Okay, and the consultation finishes on the 28th, am I right?
It finishes on the 26th, and then there's a period of time for Duncan to consider the responses and any changes he might make before moving to expressions of interest. I've got a slide on the timeline, so we'll come to that. Sorry. So this is the proposed combination of functions which incorporates communities. None of the community services are lost to other parts of the organisation, with the exception of general fund housing. So yeah, general fund housing. So that moves. Everything else that you currently have sits in that column. Might not be easy to recognise because one of the posts removed is the service director for customer services, but the function of customer services will continue to sit in that column. So down in that box at the bottom are the functions that will be a responsibility of this executive area, but they're not necessarily serviced by a service director. So some of these will have a head of service, others will be incorporated elsewhere into the structure at different levels. So communities isn't losing anything except general fund housing, and gains a lot more in the context of the combination with economy, climate and place. So it is a formal consultation with those impacted. It's a 45-day process that ends on the 26th of June, as I've explained. It's with the executive directors, service directors and trade unions. Individual consultation meetings have been held with those who are deemed to be impacted by the proposals, and they have that period at which to formally respond. The structural proposals have been shared with the rest of the organisation, but they are not consultees of it. So clearly they can pass comments, but those comments don't have the same weight as those directly impacted. I mentioned already that as chief officer roles, these are all member appointments. So where they were green and there's no change, those posts are, and those individuals see no change, they're effectively slotted into the new structure. Where they were amber, there's a significant change. The post holder is impacted, but is in a ring fence, and some of those are very small ring fences, but they will still have to apply for roles. Where they are red, the posts are deleted, and there are new posts created as a virtue of combination in some places. And therefore that will set out the slot-in arrangements and the ring fences as appropriate. So all of that has a process that sits behind it, and the business case sets out how those decisions are made. Once the consultation closes, Chief Exec will have the opportunity to review those, consider if he wishes to make any changes to the proposals, and then we will move into the recruitment process for those. The recruitment process, so all of these post holders have already been through, in order to get the roles they're in now, they've been through expression of interest, the CV process. They had a member interview. They also had an employee panel interview, and they also had a partners panel interview. So everyone has already been through those. The intention at the moment is to use the expression of interest mechanism, the CV, and a member-based interview. It is not deemed necessary at this stage for internal candidates who are in the ring fence to go through a partners interview and an employee interview again, having done it so recently. So that's the overview of the timeline for consultation. Depending on the amount of change that might come at the end of the consultation process, some of this could be sped up. So at the end of the consultation, if Duncan decides actually the comments are positive, don't need to make any significant changes, we could move more quickly to the appointment process. And clearly we've got an election happening in the middle of this, which is probably quite disruptive for those in senior roles who have active statutory functions as part of the election. So we need to look at that timetable in that context as well. The intention is to have the new structure in place by the 1st of November. And the reality here is for those people who are unsuccessful or don't apply, their redundancies will take place, and many of those are on at least 3 months' notice. So that allows for the process to complete, and therefore by the 1st of April, the savings will have been made. There's various support being provided, as you would imagine. So there's a dedicated SharePoint site set up with all of the documentation sets on here for those impacted. It identifies where they can go to seek assistance and support. And all of the job descriptions have been made available, so people can see what does the context of the new job look like, and is that something I'm going to apply for or otherwise. I want to also touch a bit more on voluntary redundancy. So moving away from layers 2 and 3, this was a proposal that across the organisation, people could apply for voluntary redundancy unless they were in an exempt post. And there were some posts that were identified as being exempt. For communities specifically, those were posts that were 100% funded by the housing revenue accounts. And the reason for that is if you make a saving through that post, it doesn't impact on the financial position of the council's general fund. It's ring-fenced money from tenants' rents. It stays within the HRA, and there is therefore no contribution from the HRA to the council's general fund budget pressures. So we wouldn't pay to make someone redundant if actually it doesn't deliver a saving for the council overall. It just re-washes that money and becomes an expensive process. We've also excluded posts that were from external funded sources. So if we've got a grant to deliver a specific outcome, making an individual redundant means that we risk the delivery of that outcome, and therefore we might have the money taken away from us. So if that post is funded specifically with an outcome from external monies, we've said they're excluded from the VR process. There are other exemptions that were put into place for surveyors, for social workers, for planners, but those are the ones that are specific to communities. The decision criteria was based around, can the organisation afford to lose the person, the post and the budget without the need for a restructure? So can we front load some of these savings? So the decision to proceed with this enables us to fast track some of the savings, because the more we deliver sooner, firstly, we've got a more robust assessment of next year, but actually you make some savings this year and it starts to pay back the cost of redundancy much sooner. It allows us, as part of the design process, to consider alternative options. So what we've seen in some cases is a person comes forward and says, I'm interested in taking voluntary redundancy. And they are required to say, well, why? How can the organisation cope without your role? And they've come up with some process principles. So it allows us to think about that. The other reason we've really pursued voluntary redundancy is that we know that there are going to be compulsory redundancies at the end of this. So the more people that are prepared to leave the organisation and can help us transition, the fewer compulsory redundancies become necessary. It doesn't affect the finances because compulsory and voluntary redundancy processes pay out in the same contractual manner, but it does allow us to do it more quickly, and it allows the organisation to tell us, how do you think that you can make savings more quickly? So it's person, post and budget. It doesn't create a vacancy. It doesn't create a redeployment opportunity. We will take the person out, the post out and the money out, and that's how it contributes to the savings. We've had to consider the scale of the service impact. So if there were 10 people doing a task and 2 of them have asked for voluntary redundancy, can the organisation cope with only 8 people left? And in some cases, there is still some duplication from the LGR combination work. So in some places, it's been really clear that actually you can do that. We've also had to look at the payback period. So if it takes more than 3 years for an individual post to pay back, that doesn't meet the original business case. There might be a couple of exceptions where actually it's 3 years and a month. Well, yeah, there's some marginal decisions to be made, but on balance, the overall voluntary redundancy process pays back, I believe, within about 18 months. So some are higher, some are lower, but across the organisation, it's about 18 months. And we've taken statements from the individual applicants, but also the service director. So it's all very well an applicant who might be wishing to leave the organisation saying you can cope without me, but the service director also has to review that and say, well, actually, I'm not sure we can. So you'll see that we haven't been able to take every application received. So there were 380 something, forgotten the final number, applicants. And through a process which was dedicated panels, of which I sat on them, that panel reviewed every application across the council, and we've been able to accept 202 of those across the organisation. So you'll see there that the redundancy costs are £12.84 million. The ongoing saving, because they are removed from the organisational structure forever, the ongoing saving year on year is £8.12 million. So pays for itself roughly in 18 months. Specific numbers, because this covers the whole council. So for communities, there were 46 applications that were accepted. 26 of those were from regs and ops, 13 were from housing, general fund housing. Customer services, there were 4, culture, there were 3. In customer services, there were quite a lot of applications, but actually we have a very high turnover of staff in our customer services team. So we're not going to pay people to leave the organisation if we can make a reduction in headcount through a more cost-effective means. That does mean that we've got people across the council who've applied for VR and haven't got it. And right now are probably feeling a bit sensitive about that point. And whilst I accept that sensitivity, this is about how we spend public money. This isn't about giving people necessarily what they want. So we've had to take some tough decisions to say, how does this help the organisation and how is this a good use of public money? So the overall numbers for communities are 46, as I've just described. This is my final slide. I think what we're seeing here is that we have a combination of factors impacting on the delivery of our services. Voluntary redundancies in one area. We've got the changes proposed in layers 2 and 3. The bigger changes will come by volume in layers 4, 5 and 6, and that will be published across summer. We keep saying summer because we're loath to put an exact date on it just yet, because we're currently going through the validation process with HR, but we hope it will be towards the end of July. That's our aim at the moment. It's complex because effectively you have to look at the contract of every employee across the council and decide whether that is significantly impacted, whether they are in a ring fence or whether they are ultimately removed from the organisation by way of compulsory redundancy. So it's a massive piece of work. There will be impacts as a result of this. We're not proposing to stop delivering any services across the communities area. We know that devolution, and I know we're going to talk about devolution in a moment, we know that that will also have impacts, but effectively, where we devolve a service, we are sending the staff resource with it. So the community, outside of this council, but the community themselves will still see that service delivered. Thank you. I'll pause.
Chris, thank you very much for that very comprehensive run through. I've got 3 councillors lined up for questioning. Sue Osborne was first.
Thank you, Chris, and you've actually answered some of my questions with your final slide in terms of numbers. However, I still have a couple. One of those is that if people were rejected now for voluntary redundancy, what is the risk that they could wind up being compulsorily made redundant? And would that have an adverse impact on those people in terms of the redundancy they would receive? And also as well, how many vacant posts does communities carry, and have those vacant posts been deleted as part of this process, or as part of the process as you go down through the layers? I think there's something else as well. It was really as well as that. So are the vacant posts going to be deleted as part of this process, or do they remain there because they may be needed later? And the risk to people who've been made voluntary redundant, finding themselves being compulsorily redundant, and the impact on their, I guess, terms and conditions. And how are you going to manage that in terms of morale and relationships?
Yeah, thank you. Really good question. So in terms of the VR process, if someone is rejected from VR, it's because we cannot afford to lose the person, the post and the budget right now, as in today. That doesn't mean that they won't be made compulsorily redundant when we do a restructure of whatever team it is they sit in. So they may find that they have, wrong phrasing here, but a different opportunity when we restructure the team. So that it does not mean that if we've said no to them today, that their post is safe in the organisation or that they won't be able to leave by another means. So there was effectively 2 parts. VR is about, can they go right now, subject to their terms, but can they go now? So there's no financial disadvantage to them. The council pays the hire of voluntary redundancy or compulsory redundancy based upon their contract. So no one is disadvantaged. The other thing to consider in amongst this is that we have got inherited terms and conditions from 5 organisations. We're not on standardised terms. Some councils paid more for VR, some councils paid more for CR. The organisational principle is that no one will be disadvantaged. So we pay the higher of those, because that's the contractual obligation that we sit under. So if they're not made voluntarily redundancy, they don't lose out on their contractual package by being made compulsorily redundant at a later date. So there's no adverse impact on them as an individual. The vacant post one's a really interesting one because I can't give you the exact number of communities. I'm afraid I'll have to go away and check it. There are vacancies within communities. Some of those vacancies are filled by agency staff. So some are genuinely vacant, and we've chosen not to backfill them because we're reducing the organisation. And some of those we took as part of the medium-term financial plan and the budget setting process. So we reduced down our workforce behind the scenes to help settle the budget for this financial year. But there are vacancies. Some are filled by agency because we need the work to continue. Some are filled by agencies because we've been unable to recruit on a permanent basis. So when we look at the structure for layers 4, 5 and 6, the new blueprint, the new design will incorporate these are the number of posts that we can afford across the organisation, and that will incorporate all of the vacancies as well. Now, clearly, it's more affordable for the council to remove vacancies than it is populated permanent full-time posts. So we will naturally take out as many of those vacancies as we can. The tricky bit, of course, is are the vacancies really in the right team? We will have loads of vacancies, and I know it's not this committee's remit, but in planning, loads of vacancies filled by agency staff. Well, you're not going to take those out when actually our substantive structure for planning needs to be the scale that it currently is. So it is incorporated into that. We will take out wherever possible the cheapest mechanism without being unfair or operating in an illegal manner in HR terms for those who are on permanent posts.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sir. Andy Dingwall, please.
Thank you very much. So the first question I've got is on the slide you've actually got up there, and it's a point of curiosity and maybe process. It seems to be a 60-40 split in voluntary redundancy between female and male employees. Is that representative of the council overall, or is there a particular reason that we're seeing more females apply and be successful for voluntary redundancy? The second kind of pair of questions are around the layers 4, 5 and 6 restructure being processed through the summer being notorious for people being away and resource being hard to come across anyway. So are you confident that the council has the resource to manage this, the biggest part of this task, the 4, 5 and 6 restructure across the summer? And will the holiday periods that people take impact the length of time given to them for the consultation periods?
Thank you. I don't have the gender split for the organisation, but we can get it. So I'll take that one away. I don't know why it's fallen out the way it's fallen out. I'll be quite honest. And clearly, we've got 5 organisations coming into one. There are some areas of obvious duplication because the LGR savings proposals got put on hold at the tail end of last year to allow for this process, and therefore this completes that cycle. So there's some areas where we've got pent up demand for change, but why that translates into a gender split, I couldn't tell you, but we can certainly get the gender split across the organisation. In terms of resourcing for 4, 5 and 6, it's going to be really challenging. There's going to be a lot of HR resource up front and finance resource up front to model the change. The consultation process will be a statutory 45 days consultation. So whilst the summer period is traditionally when people take their leave, 45 days should cover any amount of normal leave. Now, if someone takes an extreme long holiday, then they will be impacted by that, and we'll find a way through that. But 45 days is the statutory requirement because there will be a collective reduction of over 100 posts, and therefore that is a legal requirement. That's not an organisational one, it's a legal requirement. Resourcing the consultation process, we have a real spike in resources right now in order to get us to consultation. Consultation then gets published, and there's a bit of a lull until those responses then start to filter back through the process. It's effectively pretty much a pause period whilst we receive responses and then consider them.
Okay, thank you. And I've got no other questions other than Dawn. So Dawn, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Yeah, mine was similar to Sue's, and I did struggle when I heard that Democratic Services were losing some to voluntary redundancy, but they had vacancies still, and I still struggle to get my head around that a little bit. But I guess there's a proper process taking place behind all that, but it is a little bit confusing. I can't imagine how morale must be with the staff. I think it's really, really difficult, you know, and my you know, sympathies do go out to anybody working for the council at the moment, because even if you've got voluntary redundancy, you know, if you had years of service, that's a big change. You've got people who didn't get voluntary redundancy who are maybe waiting to find out if they're going to be compulsory redundant, and it's a really, really difficult time to be working and trying to get on with your job with all that going on in the background. So I just wanted to say that as councillors, you know, we are very sensitive to the fact that this is very, very unsettling for all staff at the council, and a huge challenge to keep morale going through this time. And the only other thing I wanted to just clear, I know Duncan's going to do another briefing for councillors, but you're getting responses and decisions in July, and I think his briefing's September. I'm just a little bit concerned that we're kept in the loop with changes as they happen, rather than hearing through because we're not in the loop officially for all this internal decision making process, but it does impact on us working with the staff, that if things come out via rumour, it's never ideal. I really want that communication process to be good and open and transparent, because I think it really works better for people that they are kept in the loop.
Yeah, I think that, thank you, Dawn. I think on behalf of the committee, I echo and second those comments in relation to the impact on staff. This is a very, very difficult time for everybody. I think on the wider point, we all as members work with officers, and it's sometimes a little disconcerting to discover the officer you've been working with regularly is no longer there. Now, this was touched on in the briefing. And Duncan Sharkey was quite concerned, quite properly concerned with the privacy of the individual. But I think he took the message away that councillors, you know, don't want to be chasing shadows, as it were. And so it would be useful to know the changes as they occur, and in particular in relation to individual officers. And I think he will try and come up with a way around that doesn't impinge on people's privacy. And some people may wish the information to be known, and some, of course, may not. So it will be a difficult time for us as well as for staff as well. The final point I wanted to make is, Chris, are you happy to come back and just give us a sort of quick update at our next meeting to see how things are progressing? Nothing too heavy, but just, you know, if we're not going to, as Dawn says, as councillors, we do really need to be abreast of what the changes are. And in particular, you've seen that for 7 directorates down to 4, including the merging of communities with climate and place, does call into question the existence of the relevant scrutiny committees. Now, this was raised on Monday, and actually it was said that since scrutiny committees are set up by full council at the annual meeting, there would be no change until next annual meeting will be in May. However, events may overtake us, so that's just something we need to bear in mind at some point, because there may have to be some sort of arrangement that covers the both. I've no wish to add any more to that, unless anybody has something burning to say. Okay, thank you. Right, well, we'll now move on to agenda item 7. And Sarah Dowden will give us a verbal an update on the devolution, please. Verbal update. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello, welcome everyone. Sorry, Chris, I just snuck in behind you. Is that better? Okay. So I'm going to just do a quick introduction, and Jonathan's going to run through a fairly brief slide set we've got, and then Liz Dawson's going to come in at the end and talk about Yeovil. So we're here today just to really talk about the work that Regs and Ops have done, or the community service have done around devolution, and that is largely focusing on those operational services and devolving those services, not assets. We're working with assets and legal to make sure that it's all done as a one piece, but certainly things we'll talk about today will focus on those operational areas. So you'll be aware that there is a devolution group within the council that sits within partnerships and localities, and they direct a lot of the work that we do. So Jonathan and I both feed into that meeting, and we meet every other week to talk through where we are with devolution. that group has decided, and rightly so, that we focus on the main towns and cities across Somerset so that we've got a little bit of direction. But in amongst that, there are different sizes of devolution that we are also trying to work through. So it's not just, we're not just focusing on the big areas. There's smaller town and parish councils that might contact us, particularly on the operational side, and say, actually, I think we can do our own grass cutting, or we can pick this up, and we're trying to process those through as best we can in the meantime. So what you'll see today is the intended direction of travel that we're looking at operationally in terms of devolution, and at the end it's an opportunity to kind of ask any questions you've got on those particular areas, or also raise any other thoughts you've got on devolution that we can either try and action ourselves or feed back into that main devolution programme. And all of the things that come today will form part of that ultimate decision making in the council. So at the moment it's still just conversations and ideas. We haven't gone through the formal processes of key decisions, so that will all follow as part of this process. So I think I'll probably hand over to you now, Jono. Thank you.
Moving the same as Chris. Oh, there we are. Yeah, thank you. So I'm Jonathan Stevens. I'm the head of operations, working to Sarah. I'll take you through a few slides today. I'll talk about the main city and town councils that we've worked with and the progress we've made there. But Sarah mentioned, this is primarily a service devolution that we're talking about today. This is primarily a service devolution that we're talking about today. So just for everybody's benefit, I suppose, I just wanted to set out what those services are. So this is the operational services within Regulatory and Operational Directorate. So it's grounds maintenance, and that includes things like trees, hedges and shrub beds, as well as the grass cutting, parks and open spaces, play areas, public toilets, our street cleansing services. So that's roads and pavement sweeping, bin emptying, fly tipping and graffiti removal. And like Sarah said, these are all services, but clearly when you're looking at devolving things like play areas and open spaces, there's an asset management crossover there when you're having the discussions with the town and city councils. The initial focus has been on those main town and city councils. So there's Taunton, Bridgewater, Wellington and Minehead, and I've got slides for each of these, which I'll take you through. And then there's also the work out in the former Mendip District Council area. So some of you in the room today will be aware of the work that we're doing on the outsourced services in Mendip. So the former Mendip District Council outsource street cleansing and grounds maintenance to an external contractor to provide those services. That contract ends May the 31st, 2025. So with that in mind, we've started to have conversations with the main councils over there to talk about life after that contract and understand their desires around service devolution. So I'll start with Taunton. Taunton actually is a piece of work that predates the Unitary Authority. It was started off by the former Somerset Western Taunton in line with the setting up of the new Taunton Town Council. So when Taunton Town Council came into being, they are taking on the ownership of the parks listed out there and the public toilets. So that work was kicked off prior to Unitary, and those asset transfers are currently in the legal process and are soon to complete. In order to ensure a kind of seamless transfer of services in line with the assets, a buyback arrangement was set up between Somerset Council and Taunton Town Council. And that basically means that Somerset Council have continued to maintain the open spaces and the toilets on behalf of Taunton Town Council, using all our existing resources, and Taunton Town Council simply pay out costs for that. But that arrangement ends at the 1st of April 2025. And at that point, the resources to manage the parks will pass with the ownership to Taunton Town Council. And when I say resources, that's likely to mainly be around staffing, so there'll be some 2p implications for staff to transfer over. Bridgewater is the first one that we've completed as a service. So Bridgewater Town Council have taken on the grounds maintenance and street cleansing services on behalf of Somerset Council, and that was devolved and started on the 1st of May this year. There is a asset transfer to follow with some of the open spaces. That's in process at the moment, but that process does take longer than transferring our services. So just to kind of bide that time, we're working with Bridgewater Town Council under a maintenance agreement. So the land is still in our ownership, but Bridgewater are completely maintaining it and paying for it, using their staff and their resources under a maintenance agreement. As soon as the legal process on the asset transfers is complete, that maintenance agreement will not exist anymore, and it will just be entirely Bridgewater doing that work. Wellington is another town council we've made good progress with. We've had some really positive conversations with Wellington. Wellington we supported in terms of understanding costs. Their desire was around devolution of grounds maintenance, open spaces, play areas, public toilets, trees and bus shelters. And like I say, together we kind of built a cost for them on that. And officers of the town council took that to the Wellington Town Council, and there was a budget approved for a service and asset devolution package to start from the 1st of April 2025. So that's the target that we're working to. There's a Wellington Town Council and Somerset Council officer working group now set up. We've been meeting monthly for about 3 months. Wellington have recruited staff to support that process, and we're working to deliver that for the 1st of April 2025. It's subject to obviously our internal Somerset Council democratic process, and that began last month with a trip to Asset Management Working Group, who approved in principle the assets that we were looking to devolve with the services. Minehead Town Council, again, this remains at officer level at the moment, but again, really positive conversations with the town council there. There's a package of service devolution under discussion, and a broad agreement at officer level that should look at grounds maintenance, open spaces, play areas and trees. So that's the theme in all of discussions that we're having with all the councils really of all sizes, with the exception of Bridgewater. It's mainly around parks and open spaces where the interest is. So yeah, like I say, officers working with our respective members to start to crystallise this into something that the two councils can agree on. There's some asset implications with this one, and they're due to be discussed at the officer member working group at Somerset Council on June the 24th. There's also some other interest from Minehead in some of the services that we had previously declared out of scope, which need working through before we can progress further. But again, the Asset Management Working Group is the first part of those discussions. So yeah, that brings me to Mendip. So as I say, Mendip, the former Mendip District Council area, those services that I mentioned in one of my first slides are all delivered by an external contractor. That contractor is ID Verdi, and that contract expires the 31st of May 2025. We've been through a process here to go to our exec and get approval to in-source or devolve those services beyond that contract on the 31st of May. So now we're having officer level conversations with the 5 main councils in Mendip to understand their appetite for devolution of services covered with that contract. The initial steer from those councils is a strong interest in grounds maintenance, open spaces and play areas. So that's what we're working to. Again, some asset management implications, and it will be subject to a democratic process. But the position on Mendip seems to be that the town councils are very interested, the town and city councils are very interested in grounds maintenance, and that Somerset Council would look to insource the street cleansing element beyond May. We've also discussed it with the contractors themselves, and they're very supportive of the process. They've been through a devolution process at Wiltshire Unitary Authority, so they've got some things that they can bring as well to these discussions. So that, yeah, again, positive discussions. Just a additional part to that as well. I've started to brief some of the parish councils in Mendip where ID Verdi are currently undertaking grass cutting for them. I've completed that last week, so I'll be following that up with an email because again, there's some of the parish councils in Mendip are also keen to look at devolution of services. Some of the other areas in progress, it's been quite a challenge in some ways because there's been a lot of interest from parish and town councils around taking on services following the letter that was sent out by the leader. Like I say, we focused on the larger authorities, but we are starting now to get around to some of those smaller parishes, which, you know, is important because some of them are chomping at the bit to do some of this work. We've got maintenance agreements now in place with Puritan, Netherstowe and Cannington. So they, from this financial year, are maintaining their own open spaces. Cheddar is another one. That one had some asset implications. So it went to the asset management working group last month, and the democratic process will now follow on that. But that's another positive one. There's a firm interest in allotments, toilets and open spaces. So we can move that one forward. And like I say, the conversations with the smaller parishes are taking place, but we have to try and manage those expectations because I think, you know, I use the term loosely, but for us to put maintenance agreements in place with some of the councils is a fairly straightforward process in comparison to the legal process of land transfer. So we have been having to have those discussions and manage that expectation based on the capacity within asset management and legal. Thank you. So I'm happy to take any questions, or Liz can give an update on Yeovil first.
Thank you, Jonathan. I've got Andy, then Dawn, then Sue, please. Oh, and then Wes.
Thank you very much, Chair. My forgive me for not twisting around for this. Given context of my question is the error in the budgeting for Bridgewater Town Council that is leading them to dip into reserves, and given that some of the services that are being taken on by the town councils in particular are statutory services, are there robust enough scrutiny arrangements on the town budgets in place for Somerset Council to monitor the budgets to make sure that they can bear the extra costs here? Basically, are we at risk of the error in Bridgewater appearing in the other towns?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question about the sort of due diligence we do in terms of the capacity of the town. Sarah, you wanted to come on?
Yeah, I can come in with that. Thanks for the question. Yeah, specifically with Bridgewater, well, with any of the devolution programmes, we don't kind of say, oh, it's the 1st of May, we're handing over and over to you and you'll never see us again because we're running for the hills. It's definitely a joint process, and that joint process has continued. So last week when we were made aware of the report that went to Bridgewater's meeting, I did speak to David Mears just to do that, checking over that audit that we had in place earlier than I had anticipated to do it, because we hadn't had one of those formal meetings yet, but just had that conversation to say, is everything okay? Is there anything we can help with? Actually, more importantly, are you going to be able to deliver the statutory services that we've passed you? And I've been absolutely assured that we can. So I'm confident that what is in place, and actually it's always good to get the detail of those press releases that go out, isn't it, to understand the position. So that's Bridgewater. For everyone else, as I say, the due diligence that goes on with our accountants and our legal team before the devolution happens, and then post with us and the team, will be in place for all of those devolution conversations that John is talking about.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Dan's put up his presentation. We'll run through these questions, then come back to you, Dan, if we may. Dawn, please.
Yeah, mine's just a simple question. Just trying to work out what the messaging to parishes is, because like all parishes, I'm sure hedges are going mad everywhere, and trying to get hedges and trying to work out who is doing that work now is getting really difficult as councillors. I report things online and I don't get a response. I don't see a hedge getting sorted, and it's really tricky, and it's causing a lot of grief in the parish to people that are trying to access pathways, and trying to work out what is the message to parishes. If they don't take devolution, are those going to not start happening? People are sort of questioning when things aren't getting done. Is that because they're stopping them, or they, you know, if we haven't taken them on as a parish, they're not going to be continuing. I'm a bit unclear what the messaging is to parishes on some of those open spaces issues.
I think I've thought that the hedges bordering footpaths were the responsibility of the landowner or the owner of the hedge, rather than us. Is that correct?
Yeah, in some cases. I mean, I think if I can stick to my service, so if I can stick to open spaces and grounds maintenance and your kind of highways cuts within your 30-mile-an-hour limits, we're clear with parishes that this year nothing has necessarily changed on that. You know, we're clear on it. It's the same with bins. We're collecting the bins at the same frequency that we've always collected them. Part of the conversations that we will have with the parishes, you know, work we're doing at the moment within the service is to determine what our service level looks like next year. And we are having those conversations internally around things like bins and so forth. But we're having them now so that we can talk to parishes early, so that they can plan accordingly based on devolution that they want to do. So if, for example, they want to collect the bins more than we do next year, they might want to build that into a precept, but we need to do that now for them, because if we leave it too late, it'll be too late for them as well. But in terms of going back to kind of your original question, yeah, our service standards remain the same at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Sue?
Thank you. I think my concern revolves around that not unsurprisingly, priority has been given to main town and parish councils, but there's a lot of smaller town councils around that are also quite keen to know where they stand, that are looking at taking on services, that are looking at options such as highway stewards. I understand there was a price list supposedly coming out if people wanted to buy from this authority. So a timeline on when that is going to be produced would be very helpful. But I've also got a concern that we've got very small parishes in Somerset. We've also got parish meetings. So how are we going to ensure that smaller parishes, particularly parish meetings that can't own assets, they don't raise precepts as such. There is a process if they want to, but how are we going to ensure that those organisations are not left behind, not excluded, and that I know there's a process that if a parish meeting wanted to raise a precept, it can do it. One of my parishes did that, and I've asked before, can we have some guidance and a template to go out to parish meetings in order that they know what to do should they wish to go down the road of setting a precept. Not all of them will, I'm well aware of that. Some may well fund on an ad hoc basis, but I do think we need more clarity for those smaller councils, those smaller town councils, to know what it is they're doing. So I welcome hearing that you are doing work on that as well.
John, did you want to? Sue, your mic's on.
Yeah, so just on the first point around the highway scheme, that's not within the regulatory and operational services, so that is that's within the highway service. But it does, you know, we're keen as well, because again, as part of those sort of three-way conversations, it's coming up quite a lot, and the parishes I understand are very keen, and I understand why, to understand about the parish price list and how they can enhance the work. So yes, I understand that. I mean, I suppose the only other point I'd make is, you know, we're talking today about service devolution within regulatory and operational services. So we don't own within our regulatory and operational services the devolution agenda. You know, as Sarah mentioned earlier, we're driven by, you know, the other services that hold devolution. So we are driven by localities and partnerships who own that, and we're kind of going out and doing that devolution of services within the parish and town councils, and some and as you quite rightly point out, you know, there are some smaller parishes that are very keen. You know, I met with Evercreech this week out in the Mendip area. They're very keen. They're doing stuff already. They want to do more, and we are starting to get round to those parishes now, as resource sort of becomes available a bit more within the team, as we start to finish things like Bridgewater and some of the bigger projects, the resources that go around. But those parishes are equally important. We very much see this as a partnership, but they're also important geographically for us when we look at things like the Mendip contract, because it helps us understand, how far we've got to drive to do certain pieces of work as well as we plan for that contract and the end of it.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that of course a lot of the smaller parishes hopefully will be picked up by the local community network process. I mean, ours is running a sort of highways subcommittee, so to help coalesce. Not everybody is enamoured of the highway steward scheme, for example, because of the costs involved. And I think the other point is that in terms of parish meetings, I am hearing about parish meetings inquiring to merge with parishes. Whether this is as a direct result of what's going on or not, I don't know. But essentially, some of the parish meetings may decide that they're just too small and they need to be in a bigger pool. Okay, thanks, Sue.
Yeah,
Wes,
I
please.
think just
Oh, sorry.
to come back on you. Yeah, that's something that some of them are looking at, but the community governance review is extremely tortuous. So it's going to be more a long-term thing, because you're talking 2 years, and not all parishes. You have to go through a referendum. Not all will agree. That is a very long-term thing. I think what we're talking about is the short term, because people are going to start noticing that their hedges aren't being cut. If they've got bins, they might start getting a bill. So who's going to pay that? So yes, I think those discussions will go on, and I suspect there may well be some amalgamations, but that is very long term. And it's probably straying on from that, but it's probably one for constitution and governance more. But a heads up that my understanding was that potentially doing the boundary review that we're going to be doing for this, that could bring in an opportunity if any one parish did want to do that, it could be incorporated into that. But again, with no information and no knowledge on how that would be done practically, and whether that would be a way of short-circuiting the process for those parishes that do want to do it.
Yeah, strikes me it makes sense to try and have some kind of alignment if possible. Anyway, I think that's a bit beyond our scope at the moment. Wes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was merely going to ask, why was Yeovil not mentioned in the last set of updates there? I see on the last slide that it looks like it's going to have its own. We're going to have our own, yes. So I'm guessing we're still very special. Obviously, we're having our own set of slides. Thank you, Chair.
Martin, then, and then we'll move on to Yeovil.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, right. I'm speaking as one of those Mendip town, representing one of the Mendip towns, and actually where I'm also a member of the town council, so two hats. Yes, we talk about the language here of judging what the appetite might be. Out there, the language is impatience. Why hasn't this not happened already? And very strongly communicated to me and others. I suppose my question is, when can we get to the point of having real good visibility on this whole process, so that we're having this very open, ongoing discussion about how this process is going on? Because at the moment we feel a bit in the dark about how this is all going to go forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I think inevitably everybody's sort of moving at their own pace, and I think I did ask Sarah at the last meeting, particularly in terms of the Bridgewater, whether this was likely to be used as a potential blueprint, because actually in the long run, you're absolutely right. It would be really nice just to have a structure and a blueprint laid out that anybody who wanted to take advantage of this kind of thing would know the steps involved and the timescale and hopefully the costs. I don't know, Sarah, whether you wanted to add any more to that?
Yeah, can do. And you're right, Bridgewater was used or is being used as a blueprint. So I know Ali's online and she's capturing all these comments. So she can feed directly back into that devolution team to make sure that we've got that plan of the process it goes through that can be shared with the town, city and parish councils going forward, to give them a bit more clarity on the process.
I mean, to an extent it is iterative. How long do you think before you can say this would be our plan? Are we nearly there, or?
Well, in terms of the ones we've talked about today, I guess my pie in the sky plan is that these will be resolved by the end of this financial year, because we are under the pressure to do that. So that is my timescale for those. We can work through the timescale for all the all the town and city and parishes that John has talked about, we can work through a timescale and share those with you. But at the moment, we're just fitting them into, they're on the forward plans for different committees and the decision making process. So we're going through that. Those that are not currently on that slideshow that we haven't talked about today, then I haven't got a plan obviously worked up for those yet, but we are pushing through them as we speak.
So ideally, you'd want to have a programme that I think somebody mentioned Evercreech, and we're using that as an example. You perhaps try and do that in quarter 1 next year, and
Yeah. It's trying to make sure, you know, we talked about this last time. I think Jonathan and I can go around devolving all sorts of services and things, and if Evercreech would like to do it, we can do that. And our end, operationally, pending all the right HR processes and legal processes, we can do that fairly quickly. But assets and legal have a lot of work to do for all of these, and we have to make sure that we are going at the pace that works for everyone. So part of what the devolution team is doing is they have a big spreadsheet that we've seen and is shared with us, that has all the town, city and parish councils on, and all the contact that comes in from them that gets logged on the sheet, and we all monitor where we are with all of them. So there is a master plan. We're just trying to make sure that we are going as fast as the slowest member of our teams, or not the slowest, but some services are harder than others, and we've got to make sure that we recognise that.
And of course, it's a very unsettling period. So yes, capacity, Jonathan.
Yeah, and the other point I'd just like to make as well, we've got to be in lockstep with the town council's democratic processes as well. So they have their own processes to go through to get budget approval and everything else to have services operating or devolved to them by those timescales. So we have to bear that in mind as well. It's a two-way process. But yeah, just to Sarah's point, I agree. It's the next financial year is definitely the target for all of those that you've seen up on that screen.
Okay, Liz.
Just wanted to make the point, Chair, that I'm seeing this process from another angle. So I'm seeing it go through the devolution desire, and I saw a lot of that back in my days at Mendip, where one of the biggest devolutions of the Bishop's Barn and the recreation ground in Wells took us 4 years, because the Charities Commission and listed building were involved. So that was a really long piece of work and was in legal for a couple of years. I'm not suggesting that we're looking at anything like that at the moment. I'm just saying, be glad we did that one at Mendip, because you wouldn't want that one now. So the devolution desire coming from the parish, town, city council, and then what that means to operations. And then when it comes to the asset management group, and don't forget that that group is also working on sale of assets in order to bring in the capital receipts to fund the capitalisation direction that will pay the redundancy costs in order to reduce the council to a viable size. And then it has to go to legal and HR, and the differences between a freehold transfer and a lease transfer are very different. And don't forget too that we put back the £600,000 reserve to help devolution, and the need there for that to pay for templates that can work at different sizes, rather than needing a legal piece of work for every single devolution as a bespoke piece, because that would cost an awful lot more than 600,000, both for this council and for the parish, town and city councils. It is an incredibly complicated time at the moment, and that the workload is immense for all of these people that we've mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I've got a couple of very quick questions for Jonathan. Does this include roundabouts? Does your remit include roundabouts?
No.
Okay, that's easy. And I think you mentioned that Minehead Town Council might be interested in assets other than grass cutting and things like that. Would that include any cafes or places like that which have been items of interest to previous councils?
Yeah, quite possibly.
Okay, well, we'll leave that one there then. Let the asset team deal with that one. Okay, thank you very much. Dan, Yeovil, please. Oh,
Hi,
Liz, I beg you, I do
yeah,
beg your
no, it's
pardon.
fine. It's okay. So Dan and I are both here. So you've got me remotely because I've got a bit of the lurgy. So apologies for that. I'm not with you today. But Liz Dawson, Service Director for Cultural Services. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm the Senior Responsible Officer for the Devolution Deal for Yeovil Town Council. Dan Webb, who's with you in the room and who will be operating the slides, he's actually the programme lead. And I believe we've also got Stephen Hellard in the room from legal. So if there's any key questions that people want to ask, we're here to answer them after the slideshow. So Dan, if we could flick through to the next page, that'd be great. So the first thing to say is obviously in relation to bringing the devolution deal together for you with Yeovil Town Council, there's been a lot of work that's gone on behind the scenes. This is a very busy slide. I won't go through it in detail, but just to say that obviously the draft devolution framework was brought into place in May 23. And then this all kind of, the conversations first started between Somerset Council and Yeovil Town Council around the Octagon project. So obviously back in October, we declared as an organisation that the business case as it wasn't viable. Yeovil Town Council came forward to work with us to find a solution, which was great. So we continued to work with DCMS around that. Because those conversations had started, if you like, that partnership had already kind of developed, and that allowed us to kind of look at further opportunities as we stepped into the financial emergency. So by December 23, we had a list from Yeovil Town Council with the assets and the services that they were interested in. We then set our budget as Somerset Council in February, and then today we're here to talk to you about what that devolution deal looks like. Following this, we will be taking a paper for sign off from executive in July, and then that's for the devolution deal. And then the hope is that we're working towards the 1st of August for a service staff and asset transfer, and some assets will follow. Because it's quite a big devolution deal with Yeovil Town Council, it is split into 3 separate tranches. So Dan, if you go to the next slide, if you go to the next slide onwards, I'll come back to that one. Then it is split out. So you've got tranche 1, which is what we'll talk about in more detail today. Tranche 2 is more around kind of grounds maintenance. So my colleague Sarah Dowden, the conversations that were had there is going to be a package that's going to be put together for Yeovil in tranche 2. So there will be wider conversations that will be had with regs and ops. And then tranche 3 will be the Octagon Theatre. So the Octagon Theatre devolves at a later stage because the capital project needs to be underway before we can devolve the theatre. So if we go back to the previous slide, Dan, I think just to really set clear what the objective was. So Somerset Council and Yeovil Town Council, we wanted to work in partnership to save services for the communities and to safeguard jobs. And we've worked really well from the off. We've been having kind of weekly meetings, and that's definitely the objective from both sides. So there's a lot of complexities, there's a lot of work around the deal. However, we kind of make sure that we kind of stick to the objective that we're trying to reach in every meeting. Next slide, Dan. So if you go back to the previous slide quickly. So just the facts. So is circa around 11 services and assets, 5 million annual turnover circa, and around 31 permanent jobs and between 80 and 90 casual staff. Probably just to note on that one, the Yeovil Town Council were really clear from the off that we do have permanent staff, but they want to make sure that these services run and that they are as smooth transition as possible. So Yeovil Town Council were very clear from the off that they wanted to be able to provide the casual staff with employment as well. So the hope is that it will be a smooth transition. Next slide. So tranche 1, and that was the agreement that we kind of met back in December with Yeovil Town Council, would be around Yeovil Rec and the cafe, the Yeovil Country Park and the cafe, the Octagon Theatre. For tranche 1, that would be a collaboration agreement for the capital project. So talking about how we work in collaboration with Yeovil Town Council up until the final business case is in place. So until we can draw down money from DCMS. So that's being developed as well. There were additional assets and services such as Westlands Entertainment Venue and South Somerset Heritage Collection. These were services that we'd not anticipated well, I would say they were unplanned earlier savings than we anticipated. However, Yeovil Town Council were very clear they had an interest. So we wanted to put together a package. And then there were some land parcels as well, which were Milford Road, access over Adwell Lane and the former Monmouth Hall. So all of that has been kind of put together as a package for tranche one. So it's probably worth saying, and I do come to a slide later, that the work that's going on from Yeovil Town Council to make this happen, but also from our own council, is immense. So it touches on many different directorates. And whilst I'm here today talking about it, the work that's going on behind the scenes to make this still happen is all the officers across both organisations that need to be thanked for it, really. Next slide, Dan. So I mentioned quickly about who's involved. So this is just a quick slide to show you just some of the directorates that are involved, and that there's that two-way mechanism between us as the lead in culture to Yeovil Town Council, but also from Yeovil Town Council back up into us. Next slide, Dan. So the outcomes and the benefits. So we're looking to generate savings circa around 600,000 for Somerset Council. The idea is that we ensure that the services remain to be available to the communities of Somerset and Yeovil, and that jobs are protected. We're aiming for a safe and a legal transfer for the 1st of August, and hopefully a successful one as well. And it's part of the council's wider transformation strategy that sits within the devolution framework. And I think Sarah Dowden mentioned earlier, and I kind of echo that it's not that the 1st of August that is a done deal and we walk away. This is quite a complex deal. So by the 1st of August, we will do as much as we can around a staff and a service devolution. Some of the assets will probably naturally follow because there's some complexities around it. However, we will work with Yeovil Town Council to provide them as much autonomy as they can have, but to support them as well to ensure that the transaction is as smooth as possible. Next slide. So the critical path, if you flick to the next slide, Dan. So just to say that we're working to the 1st of August for the staff transfer, that we're hoping to get the transfer agreements in place with legal in mid-July. We are going back to executive to take a formal paper to them because of the value of the deal. It needs to go to executive. And then we currently have the Section 123 public spaces consultation underway for both Yeovil Rec and Yeovil Country Park. And we are developing an internal and an external comms management plan to ensure that we're liaising with all of the key stakeholders. So there's something around making sure that all of our project leads have everything done and dusted for day one, so that it's a safe and legal transfer, but also the staff that are transferring feel confident and comfortable. So we are working in partnership with Yeovil Town Council around that. Next slide. It's probably worth noting as well that Amanda and I have fortnightly meetings with staff that are going to be devolving on the 1st of August, so that if they have any questions or concerns, they have regular drop-in sessions with Amanda and I to ask those questions. So really quickly, I'll rattle through the individual projects. So if you go to the next slide, Dan. So Yeovil Rec is a 40-acre rec and green open space. Again, hoping to transfer the service, the staff, and hopefully the asset by the 1st of August. There's 6 permanent staff and then casual staff. It will be circa 165k worth of savings. And full council took the decision to devolve this asset on the 1st of August. Took this decision to devolve the asset in February for the 1st of August. Otherwise, there was a risk around this asset actually closing. Next slide, Dan. So Westlands Entertainment Venue, multi-purpose venue. We lease it from Leonardo's. So the plan is to put a sublease in place with Yeovil. Again, hoping to go for the 1st of August. 17 permanent staff and then the casual staff as well, as Yeovil Town Council declared they'd like to take them on. A saving of circa 116k. There are some interdependencies with the NPO and the Music Hub. The NPO and the Music Hub would remain with Somerset Council. So there is an interdependency with the use of the building, and Yeovil Town Council, Somerset Council are working through that and making sure we've got the right paperwork in place, but that we've got a partnership approach going forward. Next slide, please, Dan. So the Octagon Theatre. So it's most people around the table will know that it's currently temporarily closed. That there's a capital refurbishment project that we're looking to achieve. We need to be able to obtain the funding from DCMS and Yeovil Town Council around this. So there's in principle funding of £10 million from DCMS and £3.7 million from Yeovil Town Council. Both of that is in principle at the moment. However, there's a way to go yet for us to get to the final business case. So we have a timeline around that we've put in the slides. But just to say that essentially at the moment, what we need to do is get the collaboration agreement in place to work out the risk and the funding around taking us up until we can draw down on DCMS money if we're successful. But the ultimate devolvement of that asset would be post the completion of the capital project. So we're looking at 2026, 2027. Next slide, Dan. And probably is worth saying on the Octagon Capital project that because the proposal that we put forward for DCMS was for a cultural arts hub for Somerset, that's what the funding's has been agreed in principle for. So there will be an ongoing need for strong partnership working between Somerset Council and Yeovil Town Council. So the country park is a 157-acre site, walks, woodlands, cafes and waterfalls. Again, this is a big asset to transfer with some complexities, as you can imagine. So we are looking to devolve the service and the staff around the 1st of August and hopefully the asset. So there's one permanent member of staff and one vacancy. The saving will be 120k to the organisation. And again, this was an asset that was confirmed to be devolved at full council in February. And then last but not least, we'll move to the Heritage Collection. So the Heritage Collection has historical objects, around 30,000 and 6,000 photographs in the south of Somerset. What we're looking for is a lease to be put in place in relation to this. So there will be a tripartite agreement between Somerset Council, South West Heritage Trust and Yeovil Town Council. South West Heritage Trust will essentially run the service, but Yeovil Town Council essentially will have the overarching kind of control over the service, and they will pay for it and they will employ the staff. And then Somerset Council will still have to own the collection. So that will be a saving of around about 37k to Somerset Council. Next slide, Dan. And then the next steps, as I mentioned earlier, is that we need to take a formal paper to executive. There's valuations that need to be undertaken to inform the Secretary of State, which we're dealing with, and we've got legal involved, and there's a communications and stakeholder engagement is now vital as we move closer to the 1st of August to make sure that this is as smooth as it can possibly be. And again, just to express that there's a lot of work going on with our legal teams, with strategic assets, with facilities, you name it, across the organisation to get us to the next steps. Next slide, Dan. And that's it really. It's a bit of a rattle through. There's a lot of work that sits behind that, but hopefully that was some information to inform you of where we are with the devolution programme in Yeovil.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Liz. Thanks for Jonathan previous. We're running some way behind time now, so if I could ask that questions are fairly brief and to the point. I've got Andy Dingwall, Wes, and then Andy.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for all that information. All very interesting. The only question I've got is actually on one of the final slides you showed me, the legal review for assets like the county park in Yeovil. What is the risk that the legal review will block the transfer, and have provisions been made to cover either the additional legal fees that's going to incur or the continued running of the park through Somerset Council?
Yeah, so we're moving towards a service and a service and a staff devolution on the 1st of August. So that's happening. The legal side of things will be around the asset. So there will be some complexities around titles. They will likely be out of our hands. It's more of a Secretary of State issue. I have hopefully Stephen Hellard online who might be able to answer a little bit more around the complexities around that issue, and he's much better placed to answer that than I probably am. So if I pass to you, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Thanks, Liz. Yeah, it's a very good question. You're right to flag there will be some complexities in terms of deducing title. I mean, for example, the country park isn't a straightforward title. In fact, there are dozens of titles within the title to the country park. So within them will be registered titles, unregistered titles. There might be third-party rights and covenants, etc. So that will take some time to work through. In the interim, what we will do is we will put provision in place for the town council to be able to occupy, so that pending the actual outright transfer, they have rights to occupy and be able to run the services. So that's the plan B, if you like. We will grant occupation rights sufficient to enable the services to be provided from the 1st of August. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, thank you. Wes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Liz, very good presentation. I think you've got that spot on as far as I'm aware at the moment. I was going to simply ask, is there any arrangements made for the 31 staff that are permanently being tubied over? I mean, is there any physical space where they need to be in Yeovil, or they can work remotely, or from the current offices they're in, or what?
Well,
anything that you reply about that?
No, that's fine. So many of the staff, or I think the majority of the staff, work from the assets or work from home in any case. So and if not, they would remotely work. But that's something that we're working through. And Dan Webb, I think, has just put his hand up, so he's probably got probably can answer a little bit more than I can. But we are working through the detail with our HR and with Yeovil Town Council around that, but we absolutely will make sure that staff know where they need to be on day one, who they need to talk to if their laptop fails, who they can ring. We are putting a whole process in place for that to ensure the smooth transition. So I think Dan might be able to answer that a little bit more detail. So I'll probably pass to Dan.
Thank you. Is that working? Yes. So I was just going to add to that by responding that, the vast majority of staff are, of course, frontline staff. They are working in Westlands entertainment venue, delivering the services there, working in the catering department and so on, and the same with the recreation ground. So, yes, some do work from home, but I think the vast majority are frontline, so therefore their workplace actually won't change.
Okay, Andy Kendall, please.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, are we allowed to have a copy of these slides, please, afterwards? Because we're very fast, we're touch. Second one is like a question. I attend a lot of town council meetings, and I've seen a lot of examples in the delays of, it seems like the county council are providing information to our officers. We're always being told that there's a delay, we're waiting. Particularly in the financial sector, and I just wanted to know: do we have enough resources in Somerset Council to answer these questions in a timely manner to the town, city, and parish councils?
Did you want me to come back to that on Yeovil?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So we meet every Thursday at the moment, and we will continue to meet every Thursday until the devolution takes place, and that will be with our legal team and Yeovil Town Council's legal team. I attend those meetings, so does Amanda Card, who's the clerk for Yeovil Town Council, as does Dan. We also meet, so that's a legal meeting that we have every Friday. We also meet and have a relationship meeting to make sure that if there's any blockers, what needs to be done, how do we unblock that, and then we kind of focus those sessions. So if there's a specific blocker for any reason, I think you mentioned something about finance. So what we do is we bring those officers into that session on a Friday where we can kind of go, right, what's the problem? What do we need to do? How do we need to kind of move things forward? This is a huge deal. There's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes to get this over the line within the timescales that we've put ourselves under. So what I would say is we absolutely are committed to getting to the 1st of August to the best of our ability, but we've also set up a data room, so a data sharing centre on Teams, so that Yeovil Town Council as well as us have both got access to that. And we've also recently put a key officer on day one readiness, so she will be our day one readiness lead. So I don't know that we can put any more resource into the project or the programme, I would say, than we already are. We are doing quite a lot. There will be pinch points, and I will continue to address that and unblock as I can.
Andy, do you want to come back, or is that?
Yes, please. Yes, please, Chair. It doesn't really answer my question. We keep getting answers from our clerk, Madam Clerk, that waiting for a finance response, and I just wanted to know: do we have enough resources in Somerset Council to address these problems?
I think Chris wants to come in here. Chris?
Yeah, I think the question probably extends beyond the Yeovil or the Bridgewater devolution deal. It's around, do we have enough allocated resources to support devolution, whether they be finance or legal? So we know that there are challenges. My first presentation was about the organisation shrinking. We know that the organisation is also trying to sell a whole range of commercial investment properties as well as other property. So there are real challenges in those teams who are also trying to deal with the outturn. And that means we're also not able to look at our budget monitoring, which was originally on the agenda. So to suggest that there is spare capacity in those teams would be completely disingenuous of me. What we're trying to do is prioritise those resources so that we're able to give enough information to the towns and parishes. So in the arrangements around the Octagon and Westlands, we're able to provide all of the current financial arrangements that we have. How the new operator chooses to run them and at what cost is clearly outside of our scope, but we've been as transparent as possible in saying this is what it costs us, this is what we spend on staffing, these are the on costs of those staff, this is what we spend on materials and advertising, on energy bills. So we've been able to provide all of that through the breakdown of budgets, but there is a wider question and challenge around the council's resourcing when we are pulling so many priorities from those finance, HR and legal teams.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Is that okay, Andy?
Thank you for that, Chris. Can I just bring one thing up? You've just spoken about Westlands. I believe, in fact, I know that the Yeovil Town Council are looking at a complete IT system to go into Country Park, Bufford Rec, Westlands, their head office, and eventually the Octagon. I've just got one question I want to ask. I've been reading through one of the excuse me, brain start working. One of the quotes, and you're not just giving the building over, you're going to start ripping stuff out before you hand it over, i.e. all the access points for the Wi-Fi, for an example. Where are you going to put those afterwards? Thank you.
This presumes
So
falls within the wider project, does it?
Yes, I don't know that I can give a detailed answer on that. If there are physical assets owned by the council that can be reused or should be, so system access and ICT will be based around Somerset Council's network, their licenses, their consents. So we're not going to try and strip out things that the town council will need, but equally if they are specific to our ICT security arrangements and they can't be passed over, then they may have to be removed. I don't know whether Liz, you've got a more specific response to that.
Yeah, like I would say exactly the same as what you've just said, Chris. So we're working to the best of our ability to ensure as smooth a transition as possible and that we work in a partnership approach and we support Yeovil Town Council. There's absolutely no way we have any intention of stripping anything out of any buildings or taking anything away unless it's absolutely critical. And that would only be because it's been confirmed between Yeovil Town Council that either they don't want it or our ICT team have said there's something around security. So there's absolutely no intention, there's no work being done to my knowledge around us taking anything out of buildings. And if there is, then I would want to probably have a conversation around that. And I'm going to look to Dan now if there's anything Dan's heard around this.
Not specifically, but just for reassurance, there is a dedicated ICT work stream. We have a team on our side working on that, and they're liaising with Yeovil Town Council's IT advisor, and they are working through the detail about what will work from the 1st of August, what won't, and if it won't or can't, what does that look like, and how and when can that be properly, handed over?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, that's my question's answered.
Okay, thank you. Good. Sue Osborne, then Andy Southern online, then we must move on, please. Sue.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. In terms of Leonardo, presumably they have given consent to you sublease to the council, creating a sublease with the Oval Town Council. And also, how long has that lease left to run? And in terms of budgets and costings, presumably when the Octagon opens, some of the productions that are held now at Leonardo, at Westlands, will move over. So there could well be a void in terms of events happening at Westlands in terms of economics. I still have concerns. The Octagon in itself, and as we're going to see in the cultural heritage strategy, is also a major plank of the flagship arts programme. Is it really fair to put the running costs of this afterwards onto one single town council for an asset that is having to do an awful lot? It's a massive devolution project. What due diligence has been done and will continue to be done to ensure that Yeovil Town Council does not run into financial difficulties as a result of potentially overstretching itself, because this seems to be quietly getting bigger because they're taking on more. And in the event that any town council, and as we've seen, there's already been an overspend or an error in Bridgewater, what happens if a town council falls into financial difficulty? Does it fall back to South Somerset? And what will happen if South Somerset itself winds up in a section 114 and these difficulties come forward?
Thank you.
There's a lot of corporate risk in this, and I'm not sure we're getting the full picture.
Thank you, Sue. I think you referred to Somerset Council rather than South Somerset. Liz, I don't know who's best to pick that one up. Is it Liz or?
So I'm happy to start, and Chris might want to come in. We've been absolutely transparent. So through the process, I think what I would say is that we took a paper back in October to say that the capital project as it stood for the Octagon Theatre was not viable. Yeovil Town Council came forward and said that they would work in partnership with us. We have been absolutely transparent around all of the costs to do with the Octagon project, and we've been really transparent around any financial information that they would like to know around the running costs of the Octagon or Westlands, etc. We've been really clear on. I would say that we didn't go to Yeovil Town Council and say, we really, really, really need you to take these services on. We said we are in a financial emergency. This council cannot continue to provide services as it does. I know it's not unique to our organisation; it's across the country. And so, actually, this is just where we are from a financial emergency perspective. The services may have to close because actually we will not be able to run them. And Yeovil Town Council came forward and said that these are the assets that they would be interested in. When they said they would be interested in those assets, we were then really clear and provided as much financial information as we possibly could at that point in time so that they were aware and that they could then set their budgets and their precepts around that. So I would say that we have been as transparent as we possibly could, but we've also got pressures on us as an organisation because we've been in a financial emergency, and cultural services and assets are not statutory services, and that's just me being absolutely clear. So we've tried to work in a really creative manner with our town council. In doing so, what I would say, we've also been really focused on the assets that we have been delivering. So with Westlands Entertainment Venue, for example, I would say that the entertainment manager has been looking at how that venue currently operates and trying to maximise what we can get out of that service. And we've also had quite conversations at length around how Octagon and Westlands differ or they compete. So I would hope that actually by the time the Octagon Theatre reopens, that Westlands has established itself to a certain degree so that it doesn't have as big an impact on the kind of the income that the Octagon would draw in, so that they're not competitors. But this is something that's gone on for years, not just in Somerset Council, but the former South Somerset District Council, and it will continue. There are two kind of venues in a close proximity, but they do have different offerings. And I know that didn't answer probably all of the questions, but we have tried to be as clear and as concise and as transparent as we possibly can along the process.
Yes.
Yeah, just to come back, I think I know most of that already. I was a South Somerset District Councillor, and I think we did, concerns have been expressed, and particularly in how the relationship works between the two, in terms of the ticket levy, which was raised by the Octagon, which was to pay for the internal borrowing when we took Westlands on in the first place, which also has a sports centre as well. Let's not forget that bit. The other problem as well in terms of how things come up, because we've seen how projects have run away with themselves in South Somerset. You've only to look at the regen and how that went over budget, and also the Child Leisure Centre project, because things keep getting added in and we don't find out about it until there's an emergency request or something. Andy raised a very interesting point, which is the point of IT, that you may have to put your own systems in when you devolve as town councils. We all know IT is not cheap. Has that potential cost been factored in? And is this something that is going to affect the other town councils? Because if it's going to be a problem for Yeovil, what is the odds of it being perhaps an issue for the other town councils? And is that going to be factored into their budgets going forward? Because it's not necessarily what's in the here and now. We also need to consider there could be other things come along as well. So are there going to be contingencies built into this?
Shall I come back on that point? So there's been
yes.
Sorry. There's been contingency built into the capital project, the Octagon Theatre. So there's been quite a significant contingency built into that project because of where we found ourselves in October. So we've made sure that contingency has been built into the capital project. And furthermore, from conversations I've had with Yeovil Town Council, they've also built in contingency to when they set their budget to take on these assets as well. So my understanding is that there's been foresight and contingency built in. I think you also asked a question earlier, were Leonardo's aware of the plans to do a sublease? Yes, we've been in conversations with Leonardo's. I don't know the length of the lease. Dan Webb might be able to answer that. We probably don't have that detail with us today, but that's something I can certainly take offline and email you the further details around.
Thank you. I
And
mean,
also
I think
there's a break clause in it as well, and I believe
Yeah.
that break clause is coming up fairly soon. And is it possible that if it doesn't go quite to plan, it could be Leonardo's themselves that look to terminate, not necessarily us?
I think if you don't know the terms of the lease, that's a question we need to come back to possibly in the future. Steve, do you know?
Yeah, I've just checked the terms of the lease. It's 30 years from 2016, but as has quite rightly been said, there are break clauses within that lease. So the sublease would be essentially for the duration of the lease.
Okay, that's to 2046 presumably. And if the break clauses, I mean, if things went badly or right, then the break clause would allow for the town council to get out. I think the bottom line here is that everybody on both sides, in the town council and in this council, is working their socks off to try and make sure that these services are continued and are not lost as a result of the financial emergency here. And I think everybody, as we've heard, is, on all areas of devolution, is working incredibly hard to make sure that as many services are retained as possible in their best possible form. So I think the committee needs to offer thanks to everybody who's working in this area, because they're working incredibly hard. And yes, it's new work, it's new areas of work, so they're learning on the job. So I think that also needs to be factored in. Right, last question I have here is Andy Soughton, who was online, and then we'll move on to the Gypsy and Traveller review. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I did lower my hand earlier on because my questions and concerns have been answered, and I think they've been answered adequately. So thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't notice that. Right, well, we'll move on to item 9 then, please. And as I pointed out, we are running significantly behind time. Chris, on the Gypsy and Traveller review update, please.
Thank you. Hello, Chris Brown, Service Director Housing. Yes, thank you. Opportunity to give you an update or an overview on the Gypsy and Traveller support and responsibilities of the council. Following my quick overview, I think Sarah's team might want to update on some target hardening work which has a relationship to this, but not the focus. So the council has a number of legal responsibilities and considerations it must have. Probably the most significant of which is the Equalities Act, and to make sure that this protected group is recognised and that we work to support and work with the community, the Gypsy and Traveller community. There are other responsibilities we have in law around planning, around housing. So therefore it is an important consideration when we're looking at many projects, how we're spending budgets, how we are supporting this group. So there are many service areas or a number of service areas which have a role within this, or a key role. So there is a regulation and operations service who help on some interventions when there are unauthorised encampments, for example. Housing has some duties in relation to this group. Housing strategies, homelessness and rough sleeper strategy will have statements in there. Housing strategies which come forward will have statements in there. Planning have a responsibility for identifying the demand, and therefore it then has to identify the supply. So the new local plan, which will come forward in due course, will need significant amount of information and data to actually make sure that the right level of consideration has been given in our planning for this group, both on things like permanent sites and temporary sites, temporary provision. So that work is ongoing, and you'll note in the report that that is the case, that there is a timeline for the end of summer for having more detail on that. And education. So there is an established resource, small resource within the education service to do outreach work for educational support. So that's a number of service areas which all have a role. It's fair to say, and I think the report reflects this, that the amount of resources has dwindled progressively over time. The environment at the moment will not be supporting any change to that, and that's a real challenge. So there is a real pressure between making sure that we do recognise the council's statutory duties, its obligations, and the pressures that we have to still manage budgets appropriately. There is some provision in the council as a local authority now, a larger local authority. The accommodation which was focused in one district council before is obviously now a resource of the local authority, but it is very clear that the resource that the council provides, the sites which are there, are in the south of the county, and there is a need to try and make sure we identify opportunities in other parts of the county, and hopefully through the planning process and through the local plan, sites can come forward, can be considered, can be identified and consulted on for supporting temporary or permanent accommodation. I must say that the report which I've produced is very much thanks to the historic work which Tom Rutland has done, our Equal Opportunities Officer, and there's been a lot of and I think one of the things, because of that historic work, probably shows the relatively limited progress that the council has made in this area supporting this group. The impacts of our probably slow or limited actions, it does have impacts. It have impacts on additional pressures on other services, for example, unauthorised encampments. It has pressures on the community itself with health issues, with educational issues. So there are challenges with not progressing accommodation opportunities more, and then linking into more the council support services around education, worklessness, etc. Next steps, really, I think the planning data will be very useful, which will be ready later on in the summer. I think the words and language within the homeless and rough sleeper strategy, which will be available later in the summer, early autumn, and the housing strategy, which will is yet to be drafted, probably a document which will come forward next year. The statements in there will be very useful. I think the council still needs to identify budgets and make sure that we capture any historic funding that was available and try and protect that and ring fence, although that's a very challenging situation at the moment to support the accommodation provision going forward. So I think those are some of the key areas that are worthwhile looking out for in the future. But like I say, I think at the moment, when we look over the last 5 or so years, we have seen very little progress really by the authorities independently or as one authority. Any questions really? Oh, and obviously some updates on unauthorised encampments or some target hardening, I think is might be available.
Okay, thank you, Chris. We could switch here. Right, are there any members of the committee have any questions? Liz.
Could I just come in, Chair, with some updates from the Glastonbury Town Deal? One of the projects of the Town Deal is called the Enabling Project, and that is to create off-road living space for people in Glastonbury. So this was work that was going on at Mendip for the previous 4 years. It is specific to the Town Deal, so it sits alongside the work that's being done for the rest of Somerset, but is also part of that work. So at the moment we have a planning application in, you can see it on the portal at Porchester Drove. Some of that land is in the flood zone, some of it not in the flood zone. So it was designed to make the most of that land. This last winter, that land flooded twice to such a degree that the entire field turned into a lake. And so that land now looks impossible after having done a lot of work on the development. So we're now, again, with Town Deal monies, looking at purchase of alternative land. Hopefully the first piece of land is in the final stages now of purchase, and then we'll be looking at what we can do there. It's really not easy work, it's fair to say. And everybody I speak to in Glastonbury, everybody says we need a traveller site, and then they go on to say, but not here. And that is, I'm afraid, that's not specific just for Glastonbury.
It was over thus, I'm afraid. I think you hit a real problem, Chris.
At one of our pre-meets, we had a very detailed conversation around target hardening, and you'd asked for an update in regards to Silk Mills Park and Ride. So I've been given an update from the Interim Service Director for Infrastructure Transport. So we had £125,000 approved as part of the capital budget. So that's in the budget for this year for Silk Mills Park and Ride. The work there has been commissioned and target hardening will look very similar to the other park and rides and the other facilities we have around Somerset. So it'll involve height restriction barriers, bollards, boulders, new gates for the park and ride service area, and separate access arrangements for our own minibuses that are stalled there and parked there. So that work's been commissioned, or the design for that work has been commissioned. The budget is in place and approved. So it's just a case of getting that from design into delivery. So I don't have a final date for it, but it's underway and that was approved, and financially it's in place.
Yeah, Dawn.
It's just because I don't know really. When it comes to the cost of clear up after an unauthorised encampment, who bears that? The police obviously attend and do a lot of work. Who bears the costs of those unauthorised encampments?
The landowner. So predominantly those unauthorised encampments occur on council land, and therefore it is the council that have to undertake the enforcement action to seek possession of the site, and then to deal with any of the waste left on site and the clean-up.
Of course, the issue is that if we haven't got enough transit sites and we haven't got enough permanent sites, then this is always good. You know, we're in a sort of a circle here that we're clearing up a mess that in a way we ought to be trying to sort of head off at the outset. But Liz is absolutely correct. I mean, if you make any mention of creating a gypsy or a traveller site anywhere near a community, then people get very, very agitated very, very quickly. I think more permanent sites settle on the edge of villages work better particularly the private ones. I mean, we've got one in Milverton. It's been absolutely fine over many, many years. I see from the actions that from the report in 2019, basically, so there's little evidence that unitary authority or predecessor authorities have progressed this action. Do we have a Gypsy and Traveller Liaison Officer? We do. Yeah, and that's presumably ring fenced and
so that post doesn't sit within communities. I forget where it sits now, but I think it might be in one of the people services.
So it sits within. The role is a joint role of Gypsy Liaison and Traveller Education. So it sits within the Education Service. Part of the funding comes from education. Part of the funding comes from my equality budget because there was no ring fence funding for it.
Okay, I mean, does that mean that we need to start placing greater emphasis on this particular subject? I mean, I don't know whether that the merge of the joining with education in any way sort of dilutes the effort into actually finding sites and sorting out some of the problems. Is that fair comment? Sorry,
the site issue will not sit with the liaison officer. That's not the role of the liaison officer. For me, there are a number of issues around the sites. At the moment, as an authority area, we have no transit provision at all. So our authorised encampment work is predominantly resolving in us hardening the places where they go, rather than providing the facilities so that we can provide a suitable place for individuals to go to within the county to be able to deliver. And then that creates ongoing costs, rather than potentially a larger impact in the initial, to then have less costs on an ongoing basis. So it's a double-edged sword to some degree.
Yeah, clearly I misunderstand the role of the liaison officer, and I mean I'm just wondering who they're supposed to be liaising with if it's nothing to do with site provision.
So the liaison officer is our relationship between the Gypsy Traveller community and us as a service provider. They also provide support for the community. They also provide understanding and engagement with us as service providers to make sure that we're providing the services in the right way. So it's more that relationship role between us and the community, which before they were in was non-existent because of the way in which we were treating the community.
Okay, we digest that. Sue.
Yes, I note that there is a Gypsy and Traveller accommodation assessment, and there's a timeline for it on page 29 of ModGov. And that this strategy is due to be presented to the executive towards the end of 2024, which may well answer some of the questions or provide further food for thought. Is this strategy, before it goes to executive, is it going to come back to this scrutiny? So you may want to have a look at this.
I think you're absolutely right, yes, but I think this is not for today. It's something I need to talk to Chris and the team about how we can, because it occurs to me that we need a better understanding and a deeper dive into this particular subject. So I've got Carolyn Ellis online. Caroline?
Thank you. Sorry for just plomping into this. Really welcome the work at Silk Mills, because that'll make a big difference to users of the park and ride and to residents. But I do sort of share the kind of general frustration at the lack of progress, especially on transit sites. And I just wish that, I think it would be worth our while if somebody was to be designated to just focus on finding and setting up a transit site. I know there are issues about finding land, but pockets of land have been found in the past and didn't work out for whatever reason. Shouldn't be beyond the wit of mankind. I just think somebody needs to be tasked with it. And it's been going on for so long, and the costs of not having it are so great financially, socially, every which way for residents and for travellers, that I just think it's time that somebody just said, right, enough is enough. Hopefully, I mean, maybe this is going to be part of the forthcoming strategy, I don't know, but I think the time has come just to kind of really get a grip on this one. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay, Carolyn, I think, yeah, I mean, this is something, this is a subject clearly we will want to return to in due course. Marcus Cravis, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, sorry, and thank you, Chris, for the update. Apologies, I had a bit of a work crisis going on about halfway through your presentation, so apologies if you answered this one already. But it's, I think.
Sorry, Marcus, we can't hear you very well. Can you just
You
get a
can't
bit
hear me?
closer to the
Oh,
mic, please?
Sorry, excuse me. I forget that I'm on my laptop. So with regard to a lot of talks being talked about the cost of the council and car parks, etc., and people talk about silt mills, but of course we've got a situation in Minehead at the moment where they've turned up on private land, and of course that suddenly, as I think Chris said, there's the cost is to the landowner, because of course if we make it the more difficult we make it, if we don't provide sites, we make it more difficult for them to get on the usual council lands that they do. They suddenly then end up on private land, and of course there's a cost then to individuals who may not be able to afford that cost. Not only the clearing up, but actually getting them off the, getting the land back, so to speak. So I would say, can we heighten or speed up this process and deal with this process, but also making sure that support's there for private landowners, because I'm sure it'll happen again to private landowners and they might not be in that situation. So we need to make sure there is support there. I know we probably can't offer private support, but there needs to be some sort of help. And I think speaking to officers already, that there is sort of, we're not legally able to advise, and maybe we should look at that, or legally able to help. But if you're a small landowner and you've just got a field somewhere and suddenly you have an encampment, you wouldn't know where to start. And obviously the longer it takes, if you don't know where to start, the longer it takes and the longer they're there for. So it's how we can deal with that, and how we can make sure we've got some sort of policy in place to help them. I'll leave it at that for a minute.
Okay, thank you. I mean, yeah, clear, as I said earlier, clearly this is a subject I think we need to examine in a lot more detail when we've got a bit more time. Sue, yes.
Yeah, I don't know whether you need a proposal or not, but can we propose that the strategy for GTAA, the Egyptian Traveller Accommodation Assessment, that it actually comes to this committee first, and that's your opportunity to perhaps have a deep dive. So not only does it come to committee, you also ensure there's sufficient time to do that deep dive that you want to do as well, because the accommodation is basically the fundamental part of this.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to take that on as a formal proposal. I don't know whether we need a vote on it. Chris?
Can I just make an observation that that is part of the local plan exercise, and the local plan, of course, would go to a different committee. So progress around the local plan will include those outcomes. So I appreciate there's questions about future of committees and such like, but at the moment the local plan sits under climate and place.
Yeah, but I mean we have the report here. I mean, it's clearly within our remit, and I think we need to be in a position to influence, and as every member has a right to influence the local plan as it's coming forward, and I don't see a scrutiny committee as any different from that. So, but I think we need to, when we do discuss it in more detail, then I think we will need to have an understanding of how and when it will fit within the local planning process, because clearly we want to make sure that any intervention we make or any recommendations we make will be effective and implementable. Okay, right. I'm sorry that is clearly a very important subject, and we haven't been able to spend an awful lot of time on it, but we will return to it. I'll now move on to the next item, which is Liz Dawson again on the cultural strategy. And apologies, Liz, for being way behind time on this.
That's okay. That's not
Sorry,
a problem.
Liz Lation. Just a moment, Liz.
Oh.
If I may.
Liz Dawson, are you okay if I just do a very quick introduction in lieu of Councillor Smith-Roberts, who wasn't able to be here today? So I just wanted to say, for those who understandably worry about how we can cope with the cultural strategy at the time of such change in Somerset Council, just want to say that this is a really important place where we need to work in a new and but equally committed way with all our partners, so DCMS, Arts Council, Heritage and other partners, in order to find a sustainable cultural future for Somerset, of which this strategy is hugely important. Just wanted to make the point too about where culture overlaps and crosses into regeneration of communities, economic development, housing development, the visitor economy. It is not just about those organisations and venues that we think of when we think culture. So it is part of the reason people choose to live and work in Somerset. And when we're talking about developments, say like the Gravity development, we absolutely must consider the culture of Somerset and what we're able to offer. But we need to be facilitator and enabler at this stage, because we have to accept that we are not able to do, for instance, what South Somerset was able to do for many years. And the Arts Council is very much aware of our situation. They're very much aware of our commitment to this cultural strategy. And one of the things that I have seen in meetings with Councillor Smith-Roberts and also Councillor Ross-Wyke is their support for us has been really heartening, and their support for the work that our officers have been doing has actually really made this feel a reality, not a pipe dream. So we have to concentrate on what the reality is for us as a new council, but make sure that we make the absolute most of it and develop that position that we have as enabler and facilitator. So thank you very much, Chair.
Liz Dawson then, please.
No, thank you. And Dan will be driving slides again. So I think the first thing to say is there are some pictures in this presentation that we're doing, but they by no means are the pictures that are going to be picked for the strategy. So they might be some of them, but just to be really clear, we've left the strategy as kind of a clean document at the moment. It will be designed, but it hasn't been designed as yet. We are in the process of doing that because we wanted to concentrate on the content, but it will absolutely bring it to life. So cultural strategy, I'm going to give a bit on the timeline in a minute, but I think the first thing to say, just to add to what Liz Lation has said, is that it's Arts Council England funded, so it's Arts Council funding. There's been a lot of consultation done to get to the point that we're at. It is very much that Somerset Council will be a facilitator and then work with the creative leads and the town and parish councils that already exist in Somerset, that are already delivering fantastic creative and cultural outcomes. So this is not about us saying that we're going to own it, we're going to deliver everything. It is very much around us being a facilitator. The strategy will be seen as a bit of a framework, and when I've spoken to town and parish councils and some of our creative partners, they're really quite excited about having a strategic kind of cultural strategy for Somerset. So we very much have said that this strategy is, Somerset Council are bringing it forward, but it's kind of owned by Somerset because all the really great stuff is already happening. We're just hoping to provide some sort of facilitation to it. There is a draft implementation plan that is being developed. And the implementation of that will be co-owned and co-developed and co-delivered with all of those creative leads. So there will be a need for some sort of leadership model that will need to be developed once we've got the plan in place. I believe Dan's probably put a little bit around what the leadership model could look like, but we note that times are changing. So we've just given an example of what that could look like, and it will be up to the director to take that forward in the new world, as Chris pointed out with the blueprints earlier. So there's never a good time, or not a good time, but there's never a time when councils will have a lot of budget to deliver cultural outcomes. But I think that bit that Liz Lation has said, and all the work that I've done with some of our strategic partners around the fact that we deliver cultural outcomes already. You do not need a cultural directorate or a cultural director to deliver cultural outcomes for an organisation. However, what is very useful is to have a document that people can work towards so they can kind of know what outcomes could be delivered. So it's just formalising it a little bit more. And there's a lot of other councils that work in that kind of realm. They don't necessarily have a specific directorate for it. So I mentioned about the town and parish councils. We've talked a lot today about devolution. So there are a lot of town and parish councils that are taking on lots of our assets and our services, some of which will be cultural driven. So again, even more reason for us to be part of that and to have the strategy. And just to say that as we've been developing this strategy, we've absolutely taken best practice from the former 5 councils as well as other councils, and we've been working with strategic partners such as Historic England, Heritage Lottery Fund and Arts Council, DCMS and DLUC. Various people have kind of given us insight to get to the position that we're in. Our ask today is to note the content of the strategy and associated draft cultural delivery plan, but also to provide comments for consideration by the executive. And then, Dan, have we got a slide on the timeline? Yeah, so a really brief overview. So this all started in 2022 when there was a lot of consultation and research done. So the vesting of Somerset Council, the 5 councils were working together through LGR with the sector to do a lot of consultation and research. In 2023, there was a first draft of the strategy developed, and then the Cultural Directorate came into play when the council vested, and it was at that point that we decided to do a redraft because we were aware of the emerging financial concerns, and we absolutely needed to make sure that this strategy was about facilitation and less about we've got a huge pot of money that we can deliver miracles with. So we just needed to kind of take a refresh and review it. In autumn, we obviously hit the financial emergency, and all of this work paused so that we could focus on various things such as devolution, etc. And then in January 2024, our Sustainable Cultural Working Group was established. So our Sustainable Cultural Working Group consists of 3 of our executive members, which is Federica, Liz and Ros. We've got directors and officers from across Somerset Council. I've popped a list on the presentation so you can see the different areas that work with us around culture. And we also have representation from Arts Council, Heritage Lottery Fund and Historic England on that group. We meet as regular as we need to. So an example would be over the last month, we probably were meeting weekly because we had a focus project around DLUC money, but generally we meet as we need to talk about strategies or if there's any pots of money that have come available or projects underway that we need to ask questions around. So in February, we set our budget, and then today we're bringing to you the strategy so that we can take you through it. And then in July, we'll be taking something to executive. And we've proposed that once the blueprints and everything have been signed off and the council's got a new structure in place, it will probably be at that time for the new director to think about the delivery and the governance model. We've obviously popped ideas into the paper, but we decided it was best to kind of leave that for the new director to think about the implementation plan. Next slide, Dan. So this is just our vision, which I don't think I need to talk to. Most of you have probably read or seen the strategy, but just to say that this is obviously what we've been working towards. Next slide, Dan. And then there are 4 main priorities within the strategy itself. And at this point, if Dan's available, I'll probably pass to Dan and Dan can talk to you in a little bit more detail about what those 4 priorities are.
Okay. Thank you, Liz. So, as Liz said, 4 thematic priorities. And I think it's fair to say that there's quite a lot of crossover between all 4. You could put certain things that we want to achieve in the future in any of those boxes or cross over to all 4. But we've also shamelessly linked these to or been steered by Arts Council's Let's Create strategy that takes us through to 2030. So, for example, if we talk about culture for all, we are clearly talking about people here. We're talking about culture being inclusive and being accessible, and so that everybody can benefit from cultural and creative opportunities. This links to the Arts Council's Creative People theme. Connecting communities, well, it's about people too, but it's about people working together in communities and our cultural sector and different parts of the county, different communities that are good at different things and have their own priorities. So, the Arts Council have a theme around cultural communities. So there's another strong link here. The culture for economic prosperity or growth, if you like, This is really about Somerset attracting more visitors. It's about attracting more investment, as Councillor Lation said earlier. It's the link to the economic development strategy, and it's recognising that our creative economy is really important and growing. It's also about people's, young people in particular, their skills and employment opportunities. So that's that theme. And place is of course really important too. So this is about people that obviously live here, that work here, that want to visit here, and making continuing to make Somerset, as good as it could possibly be. Arts Council have a theme around a creative and cultural country. So I suppose we are replicating that at local level here as well. When we come on to the draft delivery plan, you will find some more specific actions, ideas within that document. So that kind of brings these themes to life a little bit more.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. So we've gone. So obviously Dan's probably just gone through a lot of this. So culture for higher levels of engagement, wider geographic reach, accessible venues, performance and events, and access for children and young people. There's definitely something in our cultural strategy around creative careers, but creative experiences for young people, but for all. But there's definitely something that we're doing within some of our strategic projects to link those outcomes together. Next slide, Dan. To connecting communities, to reduce social isolation and loneliness, increase offering of community-led cultural opportunities, increasing collaboration and co-production, and collaboration in seeking external funding. Next slide. Dan's spoken quite a lot about the economic prosperity, but again, it's to say that we are very much working across directorates with this. So whilst we've developed this in the cultural directorate, and I'm sat in front of you today, is exactly the same as what I've said from a devolution perspective. There's so many officers that sit behind this that would help to deliver on this strategy. Next slide, Dan. And then celebrating place. And again, Dan did quite a lot of talk around that, obviously, initially, but just an increased sense of pride, really, for where we live and delivery in the next steps for Somerset. So it's really about providing a framework so people have got something to work from, whether that's the council in all of our different directorates, or whether that's useful for our creative leads or our town and parish councils, so that we've got a strategic position. So make culture the core of everything that we do as a council, every directorate, and the projects that we deliver and the outcomes. And again, if you look at the draft implementation plan, it goes into much more detail of what the steps are to achieving that. And again, you can see some of the different directorates that we're working with. So collaborate across Somerset, both internal and external. So we've just put a few examples of some of the work, such as Knife Angel, the DLUC funding for the East, what can be achieved when you have kind of an objective to work towards, but you're also working in a really collaborative way internally and externally. You don't need huge pots of money, but what actually you do need is people's commitments and enthusiasm and drive and something to work from. Use culture as a powerful tool to address our most complex and pressing issues. Absolutely, that some of using public art, but various means to drive some of these issues home is really, really important. Both for us, but across the UK and the world, really. Cultural kind of outcomes are definitely delivered in that way. Engage the community creatively and authentically through consultation. So again, when we put together a cultural strategy and we think about people working in a creative manner, it's not just about creative outcomes, but it's also about how we work. Are we working in a creative manner? Are we doing consultation in a creative form? So we can pull it into every aspect of what we do, and to deliver the cultural arts hub for Somerset, i.e. the DCMS capital project. So there are a few areas within our delivery plan where we have said that there needs to be a commitment from Somerset to absolutely kind of make that happen. And when I say commitment from us, I mean a commitment to work with our partners. Next slide, Dan. So we want to be really, really clear that we are seen as the facilitators, that this is a Somerset owned strategy, that the creative leads already exist. All we want to do is provide some facilitation. So now there is a strategy. If it gets adopted and goes to executive, the idea will be to co-develop, co-own and co-deliver the outcomes from that with the creative partners and leaders that already exist across Somerset. Next slide. And that's us done. But you'll see, most of you have probably seen that the strategy is available to look at, and if you haven't, we can definitely circulate that. But the other thing to say is that we will absolutely be getting that designed so that it really absolutely brings it to life for Somerset as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? It's a considerable piece of work, which of course has been in the offing for a long time, yes. And I think it's to be commended. I think one of the comments that I made in the pre-meeting was delivering a cultural strategy in the context of the council and where it is at the moment. And so I think the emphasis on facilitation is well made. So I've got Sue Osborne anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you've probably beaten me to it on that one. I really welcome the emphasis on facilitation, where it is bringing people together and it is the people themselves that make things happen. And that certainly seems to be a model with all the range of festivals and village events, some of which are bigger than others. We really are incredibly diverse, so facilitation is probably the way forward. What role or contribution are the local community networks? What do you envisage the role, the contribution of local community networks making to, I guess, the evolution of this strategy?
Yeah, I can answer that. So we absolutely will need a model to be able to talk to people around Somerset with, and there could be opportunities there with our LCNs around how we interact with our town and parish councils, etc. I think I've attended some cultural forums for other organisations, and I think the only risk that there is that where you just need to be really quite creative around how you work between cultural networks and LCNs, because what can happen when I've attended other cultural forums is that you start talking about potholes and planning when actually you're really there to talk about creative outcomes and opportunities for the council. So I think there's absolutely opportunities there. That's the bit that needs to be explored in the implementation plan, and that's why we've left it open, because that's absolutely the next piece of work that needs to be explored in further detail.
Yeah, I think we did touch on this in the sort of pre-meeting, didn't we? That local community networks would be a good vehicle to get this promoted, and it would be a welcome distraction from the potholes and the ditch cleaning and things like that, which tend to take up a lot of the meeting. I've got Caroline Ellis on that. Did you want to say something, Dawn?
I was just going to say something on the local community network front, because I chair the Taunton one, and we do have a young people's working group, and
brilliant.
That is drawn in a lot of people who are doing some of the creative work with young people in Taunton, and it has been a really useful forum to bring people together across all aspects of youth work. But it's very much also drawn in some of the creative aspects of supporting children.
Thank you, Dawn. Caroline, online, please.
Thank you. Obviously, I very warmly welcome this, and I think you've done a great job of drafting it. I think all of the stuff around the aspirations and the values and the ambitions is very well written. I appreciate a good piece of prose that actually, kind of has a bit of oomph to it. So I think it's very well written. I welcome all the stuff around, looking to embed culture across the council, and so that all parts of the council are looking for and exploiting ways to use culture, because it's such a powerful thing for all sorts of things: health and well-being, prevention, education, creative opportunities, great for careers, all of the rest of it. So I think that's all great. I think I maybe have liked to see more around sort of the future and not just focusing on the existing cultural hubs that have got money funneling towards them.
Yeah.
So in the dying days of SWT, for example, we had the Cultural Forum, which was Somerset, West and Taunton wide, but we'd also started doing work with West Somerset partners and just bringing together the West Somerset partners, but also like really connecting them in. But it was brilliant. And you've got some amazing organisations over in the west of the county who sometimes feel a bit sort of cut off. And I think at the moment, so I'd like, it seems to me the aspiration needs to be that we've got all of these creative hubs around the place, because what happens in Yeovil is amazing, great, and it may have sort of trickle benefits, but actually, if you live in Dulverton or Porlock or even Taunton, you actually need a bigger focus on in your area, in your patch, what can be done to stimulate access to culture and creative opportunities. And there are distinct challenges depending on where you are. And I also would hope there's an aspiration to be lobbying actually national government to say culture is something there should be investment in. It's almost like it should be a per head thing, because I know the difference a small, say for example, grants budget can make, because we had that in SWT. And you can partnership fund, and it makes such a huge difference. A tiny bit of money goes a long way. We don't have that money now, but I definitely think it's something that we should be pushing for people to understand. At Westminster and Whitehall, with the change of government, there's that opportunity to understand actually this is something that you should be investing in, not just the sort of projects that you have to compete for, right, which is where most of the money lies at the moment, but actually there should be strategic investment across the piece down to local councils. So that's one sort of comment. The other one is around, I'm just very keen to understand how town councils and parish councils can come together with Somerset Council, because say for example, so Taunton, we've adopted our own arts and cultural strategy. We have got our own arts and culture working group, which essentially is a mini cultural forum, but it's how are we going to be able to connect in with the Somerset wide strategy and the people making the decisions at Somerset level. I'd just want some more clarity on what that might look like. So those are my main points. I think I've had something else. Oh yes, no, one really crucial thing, again, it's going to be absolutely vital, working out how you bring together all of the cultural partners, not just the key ones, but I think at the moment, if you're a cultural organisation, if you're delivering arts provision, at the moment, you're having to go, and especially if you're a Somerset-wide body, so let's say, for example, Somerset Youth Theatre, that's just one example, there are many more. So they're having to go around each individual town council, getting little bits of money here, there and everywhere. It'll be the same for Somerset Film, Somerset Art, they're all having to do that, and it feels fragmented at the moment. And I think, I certainly feel in Taunton, we're ploughing our own furrow, because that's, we have to get on with it essentially. But I do think, you could play a vital role in trying to knit some of this together. So it's how that will all work. Sorry, I've waffled on.
That's great. Did you want me to come back on some of that?
Yes, please. I mean, if you could be a bit succinct, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So budgets, the budgets have kind of gone. We're in a financial emergency. This is a 10-year strategy. So initially facilitators, but who knows what can happen in the future. Absolutely. If there's an opportunity to lobby central government, we all know the great stuff that culture does. It's a preventative service. I just want to be really clear. We work from a very central perspective in our team. So we've been really clear on that from day one, that we try to do as much equally as we can across all areas in Somerset, and we will continue to do that, because it's really important to have that equal spread. But also what's become even more interesting is noting the bit you said, Caroline, about knitting bits together. So there's something that might happen over in Frome, and you can knit that together with something that's happening over in Yeovil, and then that knits together with something that's happening in Watchet. And because I sit in a very central space, I can see all of those opportunities, and you can see the strategic outcomes for Somerset could be quite immense. You don't need lots of money. You absolutely need somebody that can facilitate and knit all of that together so that you've got that interconnected working. And that's absolutely our intention. However, as we've said, the implementation plan is open to development of whoever that new director is. So and the opportunities to work with LCNs, the opportunities to shape that. So we've done the first part. We've got the implementation plan, its draft, that leadership model, and how cultural forums and networks develop and interconnect in Somerset is going to be really key. But I've tried not to shape it too much, Caroline, because I need to kind of probably wait for whoever wants to take that piece forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Marcus Kravis online, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll try and be succinct. I'd just like to thank Councillor Ellis for the shameless plug for all the good things that happen in West Somerset with regard to arts and culture. And obviously, if anyone's not seen the new exhibition at the East Quay at the moment, apparently it is awesome, and I highly recommend it. On that, I mean, it was that's very interesting about the town councils, because to try and I think Minehead Town Council might be a long way from having a cultural strategy, but it's always something good to aim for. We've all, in the conversations I keep picking up, it's people in Somerset, it's local people, it's the arts and culture in Somerset, but it's how we aim that again towards the visitor economy, because actually it's a big plus for the visitor economy, particularly, admittedly they might, it might be a bit hit and miss what they get to see in Minehead if they come to Minehead and want to go and see something at the local theatre, but it's how we can link that into the visitor economy. And of course, we know the problems we're having with, funding with regard to Visit Somerset, etc. And we can be doing all this great arts and culture work, but then if we haven't got, we haven't got that, what's the word for it, the DMOs, they're left to actually help promote it. Where does that leave us? Because actually, we can do it for ourselves, but obviously the visitor economy is a huge thing for Somerset, and we need to make sure that we can somehow link it in and make sure that somehow, and I don't know where we'd ever find the funding, but that funding is available.
I can come back on that if you'd like.
Please.
To say I absolutely agree. So I also attend board meetings with Visit Somerset, and we work across directorates with our colleagues in plan and economic development around the opportunities in the GMO and what the future could look like. We don't have the money at the moment, but obviously an ambition would be, once you've got a cultural strategy in place, if there's more that you can be doing around a visitor economy, the two go hand in hand together. But we're just constrained around funding, but we just need to again think about what we can do creatively, working in partnership with all of our creative partners, including the visitor economy, I would say.
Okay. Elizabeth, thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Dan, for that presentation. I can't see any other questions or comments, so we'll move on. Move on with an apology from me. We're now, I'm afraid, about an hour beyond where we were. The devolution item took a lot longer than expected, I'm afraid. So we have an item 11, equality's due regard requirement for scrutiny, which will be followed by a training session offline for the members of the committee. Any members of the committee will be able to phone in, but it won't be a public session. It won't be public. So I think what we ought to do is just have a short break if we can, because I'm sure people will want a break. And if we can reconvene at 1 o'clock, please. Okay, thank you, everybody. It's now 1 o'clock. We've still got one item on the agenda, but unfortunately, quite a few members of the committee have had to leave because we have overrun. So I've taken the decision that we will adjourn this particular item on equalities and the training session that's associated with it to a further date, and we will come back. And so under the circumstances, I wish to thank everybody for their attendance and their contributions today, and I'm formally closing the meeting. Thank you.